Please be seated. Members of the jury, good morning. Mr. Mitchell, please call your next witness.
State called Chris Parrott.
This witness has been sworn.
Good morning.
Morning.
Will you please introduce yourself to the jury?
I'm Chris Parrott.
Mr. Parrott, what do you do for a living?
I'm a director of corporate investigations at Samsung.
Okay, and at Samsung, how long have you been there?
8 years last week.
What do you do at Samsung?
I head up the team that does all corporate investigations, digital forensics, and e-discovery collections.
Now, that's not been your career for the majority of your life, is that right?
No.
What did you do before you started working at Samsung?
I was in law enforcement for 30 years.
Okay. Let's talk about that career in law enforcement. Tell us how it started. Where did you start as a police officer?
I started as a deputy sheriff in Hayes County, Texas, while I was attending Southwest Texas State University in San Marcos, Texas.
What did you get your degree in?
I did not get my degree. I left to come north before I finished.
Okay. And so after you left there, where'd you go next?
Plano PD.
How long were you at Plano PD?
26 years and 1 month.
All right. While you were at Plano PD, what are some of the different units that you were in during that time?
I first started out in patrol, like most everybody. When I made detective, I was first assigned to the juvenile unit as a detective. Then I went and was selected to the narcotics unit. After narcotics, I helped start the family violence and child abuse unit. And then after that, I was selected to go to the FBI as a task force officer in digital forensics.
Okay. What year did you start at Plano PD?
1987.
Okay, so just as Plano was starting to kind of boom.
Yes.
You saw it grow up, basically.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then you said that you also went to the FBI. Tell us what you did at the FBI.
I accepted the position with a commitment for 5 years and went through what they call their CART training. It's digital forensic certification that's issued by the FBI. It includes about 2 years of study, on-the-job training, testing, getting certificates, oral exams, written exams, research papers. I got through that and then did another 3 years as an examiner. I was a training coach and a training coordinator for the local lab down in Dallas.
How long did you work for the FBI?
Technically, I still work for Plano. They pay the bills, but I was assigned there for 5 years.
Gotcha. And when did you ultimately retire from Plano?
On June 3rd, 2013.
Now, you mentioned that you were in the juvenile unit for a while. In 1992, were you in that unit?
Yes, ma'am.
And it's been a long time since you've actually worked for Plano or worked in that juvenile unit. So do you remember every single case that you came across when you were doing that work?
No, ma'am.
When you were in juvenile, what kind of cases did you handle?
At that time, the unit worked all cases that involved a juvenile as a suspect or a victim.
Okay. And do you have a specific memory about Bryan Cahill, or do you just remember him because of reports that you've seen?
Just refresh my memory with a report I've seen.
Okay. In May 25th of 1992, were you assigned a case involving Bryan Cahill?
Yes, I was.
And through your investigation of that case, did you read and rely on an incident report that was made by responding officers?
Yes.
Okay. Let's talk about that case that you looked at for your juvenile case, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
What was the nature of that report that you read?
It was a runaway case.
And explain to the jury what a runaway case is.
A runaway is when a child under 18 years of age leaves the home without permission,
okay. And
without intent to return.
How old was Bryan Cahill at that time?
15.
And do you know who made that report to law enforcement?
His mother, I believe her name was Christine or Krista or something like that.
And can you recall, based on what you've refreshed your memory with, what the details of that that incident was?
Yes.
What are those details?
The child was at the time currently in custody of a hospital, a mental type hospital in Austin, Texas. It's called the Oaks, for treatment, I believe, of depression and like behavioral issues. The child needed to have some medical exams, so the child came back in the custody of a counselor from the hospital in Austin who was going to attend, to the child at the time. Came back to the mother's home, and very shortly after they arrived, the mother, the child had to use the said they had to use the bathroom, so the mother pointed out the bathroom, and the child went in and shut the door. About 10 minutes later, the child hadn't come out, so the mother checked, and the child had left through the window. And that's how you got your runaway offense.
You said that he had been at a hospital in Austin receiving treatment for depression and behavioral disorders. He had been there for about a year, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you remember anything else about that case, or is that just about it?
That's about it.
And once you got that report, or you got that case for you to work on, what did you do next?
I followed standard procedure at the time. I was assigned the case at least 2 days, maybe 3, after the case was reported. That's about average. And the first thing we did back at that time is we contacted dispatch, because the parents are instructed that if the child returns home on their own accord, to call dispatch and let them know. So the beat officers aren't looking for the child and things of that nature. And once a child returns on their own accord, the offense kind of evaporates, because the offense is the child leaves without intent to return. So when they return, there goes the offense. So what I did is once I found out that information that the mother had reported the child came back the next morning, I cleared the case.
Mr. Peart, it's good to see you again. I haven't seen you in a long time.
I know.
All right. So, when you were detailed to the FBI, you were not an FBI agent. You were working for Plano Police Department, right?
Well, actually, they do swear you in as an FBI agent and then a special agent. And then because of the cases we worked, I was also sworn in as a U.S. Marshal, because apparently there's 2 different federal codes, and you can enforce one as one agent, you can enforce the other. So I had triple swearing, I guess.
It's a way to give the FBI more manpower without charging the cost of that to the federal taxpayer, right?
They paid a lot of money for my training and stuff, so I would say it's not free to them, but the daily salary, yes, was picked up by Plano.
But the federal government's not paying your salary, they're not paying your benefits, they're not paying your vacation, they're not paying your retirement. That's all on your parent agency, right?
Correct, except the overtime. Plano was reimbursed for all the overtime I worked at that assignment.
All right, okay. So, with regard to this incident in 1992, did you yourself speak to the defendant's mother, or you just got the call through dispatch or through reporting channels?
No, sir. I was issued the case as a detective, so I didn't talk to the mother, no.
At all, at any point?
No, sir.
All right. Did you ever go out to the house?
No, sir.
All right. So her report was he'd been in Austin in the hospital for a year, came home in the custody of a counselor from the hospital and went out the bathroom door.
Yes, sir.
A bathroom window, right?
Correct.
Came back the next morning.
Yes, sir.
What was his diagnosis in the hospital, if you know?
I don't know.
All right. And she reported by telephone to the Plano Police Department that he was home, right?
That's correct, yes.
You never spoke to him and you never spoke to her?
That's correct.
All right. Case closed at that point?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Perrette. No further questions.
Thank you.
Nothing further from the state.
Is
Is this witness released?
State.
He's released.
Sir, you are released. You're free to stay or go, whatever you'd like to do.
Thank you, Your Honor.
State, call your next witness, please. Sir, please come forward in front of the bench to be sworn. Good morning. Please raise your right hand for me, sir. Do you swear or affirm that your testimony will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Please have a seat.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Will you please introduce yourself to the jury?
My name is Mike Schoonover. I'm a retired police officer from the city of Plano.
Okay. And Mike, when did you retire?
I retired in March of 2015.
And after you retired from Plano PD, and we're going to talk about your time at Plano in just a minute,
Okay.
but after you retired from Plano PD, did you retire completely or did you go somewhere else?
Well, I was retired for a couple of weeks, and I was recruited to go to work as a government contractor for the United States Marshal Service, and I did court security at a federal court.
Okay. And will you do me a favor and pull that mic really close? And it moves back and forth if you need to pull it closer on the table.
All right. How's that?
That's perfect. Yeah, thanks. Okay, so you went to work at the Marshal Service. Were you a court security officer there? Is that what you said?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, what does that mean?
I provided court security for the judge and for her court during court. We would be in the courtroom. We were there. We screened people that came in to make sure that no weapons or anything like that. Pretty much the same thing everybody had to go through this morning when they came to court.
Okay. And how long did you do that work?
6 years.
And after working there for 6 years, did you retire completely?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, how's retirement?
I love it.
Do you love it?
Highly recommend it.
Okay. Gotcha.
My wife's still not convinced it's going to stay, but I told her, yeah, it's done.
And you've got some grandkids that you tend to now, is that right?
The cutest grandkids in the world.
Yeah. Let's talk about your time at Plano.
Okay.
When did you start working in Plano?
I started in April of 1989.
Okay. And before you went to Plano, you worked somewhere else, is that right?
I was a police officer in Louisiana for 12 years before I came to Plano in 89.
Okay. And when you were in Louisiana, what kind of work did you do as law enforcement?
Well, I started my law enforcement career in Ouachita Parish, which was Monroe, Louisiana, and I was a deputy, and then I became a diver. We would do body recovery and evidence recovery and things. If it went in the water, we had to go get it. So.
Okay, so it's exactly what it sounds like. You would dive into the water to recover things. Is that right?
I was a scuba diver. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. What other kinds of things did you do in Louisiana?
And, well, in Louisiana, in North Louisiana, Monroe, I was a patrol deputy, and I was there until 82, and then my wife got a promotion with her company, and she had to move to Lake Charles, Louisiana. So I went to Lake Charles, and when I was in Lake Charles, I was a beat cop, and then I went into narcotics. Then I was an undercover narcotics officer, and then I got out of narcotics, and I went into CID, and I investigated burglaries. I investigated 2 homicides. But I was a forgery detective, a burglary detective. I was in CID for many years, and then I went back to patrol, and then my wife took another promotion to come to Plano, Texas, and here I am.
Okay. So before you ever got to Plano, you had already had a really long career, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
So now when you get to Plano, and I think you said that was in 1989, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Where did you start off at Plano PD?
I was in patrol the whole time I was in Plano. By the time I got to Plano, I had done all the other stuff that everybody thinks they want to do, and I liked being a street cop.
Okay.
So I never took a promotional exam and never took a test to transfer to any other position. I liked being a street cop.
You wanted to stay on the street, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned a minute ago the term beat cop. What's a beat cop?
Well, the city of Plano is divided into 4 sectors, or 4 beats. Well, the beats are in the sectors, but you're assigned a particular area of patrol, and it's, so you get to know the area, the people in the area, the problem people in the area, when you get in a beat and you learn the beat, and then you can stay there for a long time, or you could have a roving beat where you don't have an assigned beat. You fill in for whoever might be off that day, but Plano's divided into 4 sectors, A, B, C, and D. It's starting on the east side and moving west. From east side is A sector, and moving west you go to D sector.
And were you assigned a beat when you were in Plano?
Well, I worked in all sectors at one point or another during my career there, and when I was in B and C sector, which is the center of town, around between Alma and Preston Road, in that area, that was B and C sector, and that's where I spent most of my time, in B and C sectors, but usually on the north end of those sectors.
Okay. And how many years were you with Plano?
26.
26 years. And in that time, I think you said you were a street cop for the entirety of that time.
The whole time.
And so you came across a lot of people during that 26 years.
Yes, ma'am, every day.
More than you can possibly remember, is that right?
Every day. I ran into new people, I met new people every day.
Okay. So when I ask you about the late 90s, would you be able to pinpoint a memory from the late 90s? Or would you need something to refresh your memory on that?
I would probably need something to refresh my memory. That's
a long time ago.
Yeah, I think the reason I'm here is because I went on calls there 25 years ago. Right. So I've slept since then.
Tell us about calls for service. What is a call for service?
That can be anything. I mean, if you pick up the phone and call 911, or you call the non-emergency number, and you just need a cop to come out and take a report, or somebody stole something, or anything that we go on is a call for service. Okay.
And some of those calls for service result in an offense, or a report being filed for an offense.
Right. If there's a violation committed, we will do an offense report. Like if you're a victim of a burglary, or somebody, a car wreck or something like that, something where you would need to do a report, then those are all calls for service. But some of them get a little more in depth as to how it will be followed up on.
Okay. So some you have to take further action. Some calls for service end right there after law enforcement responds. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Are there times when you respond to a call for service or are dispatched to a location just to kind of make sure that things are okay?
Yes, ma'am.
It looks like there's more to say about that.
Well, people will call the PD when there's really no need to call the PD out to do this. I mean, I've actually been called out to a house to make a teenager get up and go to school.
Okay.
I mean, everything doesn't require a police response, but some people in the public think that, that we should be there.
Okay. So all the way from I need my kid to get up and go to school,
right,
to offenses that then result in somebody being arrested, right?
That's correct. And
somewhere in the middle is that sweet spot of there's something going on.
Well, a lot of times, in the course of doing your job from day to day, sometimes your mere presence alone will straighten out the situation. It may just need a little fine tuning, and you go out there and if you can use your verbal skills and you can resolve a problem, sometimes that's all we have to do.
Okay. Now, do you have a specific memory about times that you responded to calls regarding Bryan Cahill?
No, ma'am, I do not.
Okay. Have you reviewed your calls for service to refresh your memory?
I have. I've reviewed the calls for service, and they were, one was in 96 and one was in 97. Okay. Now, one of the other officers was trying to refresh my memory about where the house was, thinking I might remember the house, but I've been to so many, I thought at one point in time I'd been to every house in Plano.
Sure.
But I do not actually remember. Now, when I saw a picture of him, he did look somewhat familiar.
Okay. Would it help you to take a look at your calls for service notes while we talked about those two times, the 96 and the 97 incidents?
Yes, ma'am, possibly.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
Yes. Thank you.
Now, Mr. Schoonover, talk to us about the reason that you make reports. We've talked about how you come across so many people in the course of your career. Why is it important to make reports, or even those calls for service that I just handed to you?
Well, on a call for service where no report was done, a lot of times we just go out there, they call and, a family will be having problems with a family member or something like that, and then they'll be gone by the time we get there. And from what I was reading on the ones that I went on, so they had a 20-year-old son that was threatening a family, no weapons, but that he was on psych meds.
Does that report help you to remember something years after the fact if you need to?
Not really. All I can do is look at this and say that it's documentation that I was there.
Gotcha.
The documentation, there were so many calls that I can look at this and I can see that the format, the way everything is written up, it's got the time I got the call, the time I got there, where it was located. I can look at this documentation and say, yes, I was there.
Okay. I want to talk to you about that incident on October 26th of 1996.
Okay.
Okay. What address did you go to respond to that call?
2741 South Cypress.
And is that in Plano?
Yes, ma'am.
How old was the defendant during that call?
According to the call notes that I put in at the time, he was 20 years old.
And I think you mentioned this a minute ago, but what was going on? What was the problem that was happening that required you to go out there?
Well, the notes that I got on the call said he was threatening family, no weapons, is taking medications, and just got out of a psychiatric ward. It says that he is a mental patient. Okay.
And that's all that you remember about that time. And in fact, you don't remember it. That's what you're reading from your report.
That's the documentation that you had given me. That's about what I can remember, or that's about the only thing I could actually testify to any certainty. And
that call for service, it indicates that you were the one who went out there. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now let's talk about the incident on July 19th, 1997.
Okay.
So almost a year later. What address did you respond to?
Same address, 2741 South Cypress.
And how old was the defendant at that time?
21 years old at that time.
And does the call note indicate that you are responding to a call regarding Bryan Cahill?
Yes, ma'am.
And what were the details of that incident?
It said that he was possibly intoxicated at the time, no weapons, just threatened his mom, but it doesn't say a whole lot more than that. So it says he was threatening his mom.
And again, it says that you were the responding officer. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And both of those call notes, it indicates that the defendant was threatening family. Is that right? Threatening family or threatening mom?
Threatening his mom. But there needs to be something noted in here that 25 years ago, we took family violence, we looked at it a little differently than it's looked at now. I mean, if you didn't have a willing complainant that was willing to press charges or anything like that, if no one wanted to press charges, a lot of times these people were just left where they were if they didn't have any means of, no weapons or anything like that.
So
when you fast forward 20 years, family violence is taken a lot more seriously, and there's been a lot of new laws that have gone into place. Now, you don't have to have a complainant. The state of Texas can be the complainant. And on numerous occasions, I have made arrests where the spouse or the injured party did not want to press charges. And I tell them, you don't have a choice. The state of Texas has pressed the charges.
Why has that change happened? Why do you think that's happened?
Just because of the nature of family violence, it appears to me that it's become more violent. People are, we've all seen news stories where you have family histories, or you have families that have gone through, the spouse will stay with an abusive spouse for a long time, and nothing is ever done about it. Well, now that's not the case. I mean, if you have a valid reason, you have probable cause to make an arrest, and you think that there's additional violence is going to occur, you don't have to have a willing complainant. 25 years ago, it was kind of different.
Morning, Mr. Schoonover. How you doing, sir?
I am well. How are you, sir?
All right. Did the marshal let you keep that blue blazer after you retired from 6 years watching over the court?
All 12 of them.
That's good.
And the stylish tie as well.
Yeah, that was it's a nice tie. Which federal court did you work in?
The bankruptcy court here in Plano. Used to be the old Wells. It used to be the Wells Fargo building. It's at Plano Parkway in 75.
All right. Okay. Bankruptcy court very much. People in the bankruptcy court get upset too, don't they?
Some of them can get quite upset.
All right. So, the prosecutor asked you about two incidents at Mr. Cahill's mom's house in 96 and 97. You said something that was interesting. A call for service doesn't necessarily generate a report. So, first of all, you don't remember, right now as you sit there in that chair today, you don't remember anything about either of these events, right?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
But you have the call notes, and from that you can read that and say, well, if that got written down in the call notes, that was written by people who were there at the time, who knew what they were writing, who were telling the truth about what they're writing, and so I can look at that and say, yeah, that's how it must have been.
That's correct.
But you don't remember it.
No, sir, I do not.
All right. Now, you also said that a call for service, and that's what these call notes are, they're documenting a call for service, doesn't necessarily generate a police report.
That's correct.
And what's the difference between a call for service and a police report?
Well, in a police report, you go into much more detail, and it's going to be followed up by, you've got an actual crime that has been committed, like battery or something of that nature. And it's going to be forwarded on to a detective, and then the detective will put together a case and decide whether or not charges will be filed. A call for service can be anything, a suspicious person that's no longer there, but there's no reason to generate a report.
I mean, if I call 911 and say, hey, my neighbor's dog is barking too loud, send an officer.
That's a call for service that more than likely would not generate a report. I would explain the process to you. Now, you may go down to the city prosecutor's office and file your own charges because it's a misdemeanor that did not occur in my presence.
So it might produce a police response, but not a police report.
That's correct.
All right. And what you were called out about on these two occasions, a person is threatening family members, there's no weapons. I mean, you know, if I tell my wife I'll kick your butt to Pizza Hut, that's an unwise thing for me to say to her, right?
I don't know your wife, but it doesn't sound like a good move to me.
All right. And it might or might not be an offense, right?
That's correct. I mean, you look at things in their totality. I mean, we all spout off stuff that we don't actually intend to do, and that's
all right.
It happens. I've been out on calls like that before. Yes. And
so, both of these were alleged threats to family members, possibly intoxication, no weapons, no report was generated, and that's what you can tell us from the documents you've looked at.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Schoonover. No further questions.
No further questions,
Is this witness released?
by the state.
He is released.
Thank you, sir. You're free to stay or go, whatever you'd like to do.
Thanks, Judge.
State, call your next witness, please. Sir, please come forward to the front of the bench to be sworn. Do you swear or affirm that your testimony will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Thank you. Please have a seat.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Will you please introduce yourself to the jury?
My name is Michael Allen Donahue. I go by Mike. I'm a retired Plano police officer after 30 and a half years, and I retired just in last July.
All right. And Mr. Donahue, what do you do for a living right now?
I retired, this is interesting, I retired July 15th of 2019, and as of the 18th, I started working with the U.S. Marshals as a court security officer up in Sherman. I basically provide court security at the federal district courts.
And so you've been doing that since July of this last year?
Yes, since July of 2019.
Okay. Tell the jury about your training and experience that you've had before you went to Plano PD.
I grew up in Plano. We moved there in 1967. Went to school in Plano, grew up there, went to college, got my degree, got a degree in business. In 1989, I tested with Plano PD right out of college. And I got hired in February 26th of 1990 and started with Plano PD then.
Okay. Have you ever been with any other agency, or is Plano where you started and where you kind of wrapped up your law enforcement career, except for right now where you're working?
Spent 30 and a half years with Plano PD. I was a first responder. I worked the streets the entire 30 years. My primary function, 24 of those years, I was a training officer, so that left me on the streets. Officers would come right out of the academy. I also taught some in the academy, but they would come out of the academy and they would have to ride with me for anywhere from a week or two to usually around 4 to 6 weeks, and in a training mode.
Okay. So you were training at the academy, and then you were a field training officer where recruits would come in and actually ride with you and do the work under your supervision. Is that right?
Correct.
And you mentioned that you were basically a street cop. Were you a street cop the entire time that you were at Plano PD?
Yes, I was. I was the one driving around in the black and white squad car. My primary function was calls for service. That would anything from a found bicycle to rapes, robberies, murders, disturbances, fight calls, whenever they need to send in an officer. And as a training officer, I guess I was lured into some of the more volatile situations. It also helped to provide young officers with more exposure and training experiences to make decisions.
And did you want to be a street cop the entire time? Was that what you really loved doing as a police officer?
Yes, I enjoy dealing with the people and the dynamics, just the kind of situation where you never know what you're going to face every morning when you get up. It's a brand new situation. They're all different.
Did you work a certain beat during your time at Plano, or did you work a bunch of beats?
Throughout 30 years, I worked several different beats. I started off working nights. Most young officers do. I worked the east part of town, which is just on the east side of 75, and then probably around 96, I transferred to the more central part of town, which would be from Highway 75 geographically to about Coit. Around that time, we also split from 3 different sectors to 4. And when I went to days in 2001, I worked also the center part of town.
Okay, so the center part of town was kind of where you were focused, and maybe you worked different beats in there, but that was where you really were located most of the time. Is that right?
Since 2001, I was pretty much, by this time, I had 11 years. And since I was training, it was the center part of town, so I could access a lot of those more volatile calls that I looked for. By being in the center, I could move out of my beat into those calls if it warranted getting some exposure. So my beat from 2001 till I retired was roughly from Parker Road to the south border, all the way up to Legacy, and then between Coit and Custer, so it was like a square, pretty much in the dead center of town.
In the 1990s, do you remember the late 1990s what beat you were working?
The name changed, but it was changed from in the 90s. The beat numbering system the name would have changed, but the beat was about the same. From 2001, it was 1 Charlie 3, and before that it was like Baker 4, Baker 3.
Okay, I'm surprised that you remember it that well. It was so long ago.
Me too.
Were you working Coit to Custer and Legacy south to Crossbend, more or less in the late 90s?
Yes.
Okay. And during that time, were there times that you responded to calls about Bryan Cahill?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you had a very long career, and it didn't end, or you didn't retire from Plano until just not too long ago. Do you remember Bryan Cahill specifically?
Yes.
Do you remember him a little bit or a lot?
I remember going out to the house off and on all the way from the mid-90s. I think the last time I was out at that house on South Cypress, if I remember the street name correctly, around 2018, I think was the last time I actually went out to that house.
Okay. And if I asked you if you could remember what the house looked like, can you?
Pretty much.
Okay. And if I asked you to drive there today, could you still drive there today?
I know I could.
It sounds like you were out there quite a bit. Is that correct?
Yes, and I haven't been in the city of Plano since I retired. Well, unless I just drove through it, but yes, I could drive right up to the house.
I want to talk to you a little bit about what you remember in regard to that house, in regard to Bryan Cahill, all right? During your time in Plano, about what time period were you going to that house quite a bit?
I can remember it all the way from roughly 95, 96. Specific incidences are kind of hard to recall, but there was enough repetition that I can remember going out to the house. It was always disturbance related.
And it was disturbance related, and the disturbance was by who?
It was disturbance. There was at the house. The people involved would be Bryan, the son, and then the mother and father. And I want to say the George and Christine, if I remember the names right. The father was pretty much there during the 90s, and I don't remember him being at the house. I don't remember running into him very often after the early 2000s.
Okay. And so when you would go out to that house, was the call usually made by mom or dad to police?
Usually the call was made by mom and dad, but after several times, by the year 2000, the neighbors knew there had been enough disturbances that the neighbors on all four sides of this house, the houses are a rear entry driveway, and so on the back side and also on the street, if the neighbors saw the son Bryan show up, they would automatically call just by seeing him before he ever got into the house. So oftentimes it was neighbors that would call us, and it would get us on the way before anything ever really developed.
Okay, and what were the neighbors worried about, if you remember?
They just knew there was a history of violence primarily between the mother and Bryan.
Based on what you remember, had the defendant hurt his mother before? And is that why neighbors were calling?
Multiple times.
Would Christine Cahill ever lock, or rather change the locks on the doors to the house?
She had done this, I'll say 3 or 4 times that I know of. We had recommended it several times. A lot of the calls, I guess the personality of it, was a lot of times he would either be intoxicated or just angry or being violent, and she would call us. But what she wanted from the police, what she would verbalize to us is, I don't want to press charges for him hitting, biting, kicking, whatever he would do at the time. She didn't want to press the charges. She just wanted us to make him stop, which kind of limits
You can keep going.
Which kind of limited us because we didn't have a lot of tools shy of arrest to just make somebody stop without some kind of enforcement action. A lot of the times that we went there, it wouldn't be anything where we were authorized to make a warrantless arrest. So there would be, an example, would be sometimes Bryan would come and take something from the house, and she would find out later, oh, this has been stolen. He took it, pawned it, or whatever. And so she would call us and want us to just make him give it back, but she didn't want to pursue the theft charge. Well, we couldn't do that. That's not how the law works. So because she didn't want to pursue the theft, there's no report filed, there's no offense filed. And we told her, well, you've either got to pursue the theft and be a complainant, or by default, he had permission. We couldn't work. There's not a middle ground that was ever created. That animal didn't exist.
Okay. So in all of your interactions, did it seem as though the defendant's mom did not want the defendant to actually get in trouble or get arrested or anything like that?
Correct. She enabled a lot of his behavior.
She just wanted the behavior to stop. She wanted to be safe. Does that sound right?
Yes.
Now, you mentioned a minute ago that he would be intoxicated. Based on your experience, was there a history of drug use by this defendant when he was in the home?
Yes.
Cypress? And you mentioned also that he would steal things from Christine, from his mother. Do you have any information about what that would be used for based on your calls out to that house?
Oh, it was either to support it. Whenever he wasn't allowed to live at the house, we were told that he stole things, either support his drug habit or just basically because he didn't work.
And so most of the time you did not file a report because you couldn't, because she did not want to press charges. Was there one time in April of 1996 when a report was filed?
Yes.
Did you respond to that house there on South Cypress in Plano?
Yes.
And what was that call about?
In 96, there was a family disturbance there. At that time, there was the father, the mother, and Bryan there. And it started over, he wanted to use the car. I don't remember if he was intoxicated or not, but he wanted to use the car, and she didn't want him to take the keys. She didn't want him to use her car. And so that started the argument. The argument escalated to where he wound up pushing the mother. He'd follow her around the house and basically continue to press her and taunt her. And he pushed her in the chest, pushed her down. The father intervened. He tried to pick a fight with the father multiple times, and he didn't. While they were arguing, the mother called us. When we showed up, we locked everything down, and basically, from a Class A assault, there had to be some degree of pain. And so we asked her, when he pushed you down, was it just he pushed, or did he shove you down? She goes, no, it hurt. So she actually gave me a written statement in that. Based on that, I was able to make a warrantless arrest at the time for that Class A family violence assault.
And that was around 11:15 at night that day, is that right? It was at night, was it?
It was at night. It was at night.
And so just to recap, the defendant is pushing Mom, following her around the house. Was he basically trying to intimidate her, and was he being verbally abusive?
Yes, from what I remember, the fight escalated over 20 minutes. At one point, he even broke a lamp. He didn't throw it at a person, but in just like a tantrum state, threw the lamp down and broke that. But when the push that she referred to is he actually pushed her down to the ground.
And so that night you arrested him and he went to the jail, is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Tell us about what happened after that, after you arrested him.
After I arrested him, I went ahead and transported him into the Plano jail. That went as normal arrests are made. I don't recall any further altercations from that. What I do remember is the case was dismissed because the mother apparently pressed for an affidavit of non-prosecution, tried to drop the case, basically.
And at that time, did she indicate that she was going to get an emergency mental commitment or apply for that kind of commitment?
Remember, there's been a couple, I believe, that were actually executed, referencing Bryan, over the time. I don't know if she was advised of that. I wasn't part of it if she ever followed through with that one at that particular time.
But she did file that affidavit of non-prosecution, is that right?
Yes.
Mr. Donahue, you recalled some of the beats you were on, 1 Charlie 3 and 1 Bravo 3. The letters refer to the lettered sectors within the city of Plano, is that correct?
In the Baker system, yes. At that time, there was an A, B, and C sectors. The B sector was the center part of time during the 90s, C being further west, and then A being east, using 75 and Coit as boundaries.
So the numbers on each side just tell you which particular subdivision within each of the two sectors?
Yes, sir.
And there's now 4 sectors, right?
Correct.
So that's how the same geographical area might be designated over time by 2 different reference numbers.
Yes. Now they have A sector still being east of 75, using that as a major north-south barrier. B sector went from 75 to Custer. C sector, where I worked after 2001, went from Custer to Coit, and then everything west of Coit was D sector.
You indicated that you've been to this house in South Cypress a number of times over the years, and that you would contact there Mr. Cahill, his mom, Christine Cahill, and his dad, George Cahill. Is that correct?
Some of the calls, yes. A lot of calls, it was if a neighbor called in, for instance. I remember several times they would call in that he was in the area, walking the alley or looking over the fence. We would come up, check the area, not able to find him, and we would clear because we didn't find him, knock on the door. He wasn't in the house. Nobody was at the house, so we would leave. So a lot of times I contacted nobody from the family.
Anybody else living in the house besides the parents and Bryan Cahill?
I want to recall at times there would be a girlfriend, but I don't know if she ever lived there or just stayed there temporarily.
Were there any other children of the Cahill family?
Not that I know of.
All right. You indicated that after a while you didn't see the dad there. When's the last time you saw the dad there?
I'm going to say the last time I remember actually talking to the dad was in the early 2000s.
All right. What happened?
I don't know.
All right. So, okay.
He may have been at work. I just didn't happen to see him.
And over the time that you worked at Plano PD from 1990 to just last year, 2019, year before last, right?
2019, yes, sir.
You've arrested the defendant one time.
That I'm aware of, yes.
Right. And, I mean, they showed you all the reports, didn't they?
I saw a lot of reports.
Right, and the only one that you're testifying about is this one from April 1996.
Correct.
All right. Thank you, sir. No further questions.
Is this witness released?
He's released.
Thank you, sir. You're free to stay or go, whatever you'd like to do. State, call your next witness, please. Please come forward to the bench to be sworn. Do you swear or affirm that your testimony will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Thank you. Please have a seat.
Good morning. My apologies. Good morning. My name is Aaron Steensma. I'm a police officer with the city of Frisco. Been a police officer for coming up on 8 years. This July, I've been employed with law enforcement. I grew up in Rochester, New York, and back in 2013, I moved here to pursue my dream of getting into law enforcement as a police officer.
Where did you end up? Well, first off, Rochester, New York.
Yes, sir. A small town outside of Rochester.
And so explain that to me. You know, you wanted to be a police officer. How did you end up coming to Texas?
I put in for multiple agencies up in New York and was not progressing through their process. Back in 2013, New York was not hiring a ton of police officers. Texas seemed like a really nice area, and so I started expanding my search down here.
And where did you end up getting your first job in law enforcement?
With the Allen Police Department.
How long did you serve as a police officer in Allen?
Just over 3 years.
What different roles did you have within the Allen Police Department?
So I worked in the patrol division. I did a little bit of recruiting, but my main position was within the patrol division.
Did you go through the academy and receive all of that prior on-the-job training with Allen?
Yes, I did.
Okay. What year did you start with Frisco?
2017.
At Frisco, what different roles have you had within that police department?
I started within the patrol division in Frisco, and then I've transferred into the investigations division, so I'm a property crimes detective currently.
And what does that mean? What do you do?
I investigate burglaries, thefts, crimes where a report has been taken. I do follow-up, file warrants, and do the real investigative work behind the scenes.
If you would, can you talk to us a little bit? What does it look like to be a patrol officer in the city of Frisco? Just generally, kind of, what is it that you do? How do you spend your time?
Okay, so a broad overview of patrol is you're assigned to a certain area. You're assigned, let me back up, to a shift. And then on that shift, you're assigned to a specific area of the city that we call districts. Within your district, you're responsible for responding to calls of service, getting to know the people and business owners within the area that you serve and protect.
Was there a certain area that you focused on while you were doing patrol, or did you kind of work different areas all over the city?
I work different areas depending on, we do year-long rotations, and so for 1 year at a time, approximately, you're within one section of the city.
Are you familiar with the area of Lebanon and the toll road? You know, that area just kind of west of the toll road where Lebanon is?
Yes, sir.
Okay. My approach, Judge.
Yes.
Okay, we got State's Exhibit number 5 up on the board. Officer, if you would, let's talk a little bit about this area. You see where the North Toll Road is marked and where Lebanon is?
Yes, sir.
Okay. If a member of the jury was to be coming up the North Toll Road and exit I believe it's John Hickman Lebanon exit and follow north, they'll pass the Star over on the west, right, that new facility by the Cowboys.
Yes, sir.
You a Cowboys fan?
I'm more like the Olympics. I don't watch sports other than the Olympics.
Okay, whatever. I don't know. I don't even know how to deal with that. But what's the next exit after Lebanon exit off the toll road?
Stonebrook.
Okay. If one of the jurors were to take the Stonebrook exit, what do they, like, right when you come off Stonebrook, what's right there on the right?
The police department.
No. What's right there on the right with the school buses and the band area?
It's the school, and on the southeast corner.
And then that's where I was going. What's right there on the north corner?
It's the police department.
Okay. So when we talk about the Lebanon road right here, one street up in Frisco is Stonebrook, and right there is the police department.
Correct.
Okay. This area right here, north of the apartments, this area right here.
Yes, sir.
What is that?
It's a shopping center?
When you say shopping center, restaurants?
Yes, sir.
We've got you ever eat at Tupi's?
Yes.
Mexican food restaurant?
Oh, yes.
They've got shops in there, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And Frisco's real proud, they just got a Chick-fil-A there on the corner.
Yes, sir.
What is right on the other side of that? You can kind of see like a I don't know, kind of an awning going across, just straight north of where that Chick-fil-A is.
Another shopping center.
Okay.
And there's a bank.
A bank, a 7-Eleven right there on the corner?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so stand up for me. Show the members of the jury where you're talking about with the other shops on the north side of Lebanon. Right in here. Okay, all right. So then, La Valencia Apartments. You familiar with La Valencia Apartments?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What is just south here, we can kind of see it in this picture, of La Valencia?
Neighborhoods.
Okay. We've got another set of apartments here,
Mm-hmm.
and then this area right here, what is that?
That's a neighborhood as well.
Okay. That's a neighborhood. Then right across the street from La Valencia, what is this right here?
That's a school, sir.
Okay. Starwood Montessori.
Yes, sir.
Children.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Mr. Mitchell, do you want a pointer?
I really could have used that about 5 minutes ago, Judge. I'm about to go sit down.
I'll leave it here in case you need it later.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So on a Friday afternoon, do we expect pretty good amount of traffic within the shops of Starwood, that area right there on the other side of La Valencia Apartments?
Yes, sir.
Okay. On a Friday afternoon, do we expect children to be in school at the Starwood Montessori School?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about some of the other roles you have as a police officer at Frisco PD. Is one of the roles for our patrol officers to also serve as, I guess, desk duty?
Yes, sir.
If you would, please describe what desk duty is to the folks.
Within the lobby of the police department, there's one section where an officer is stationed. That is on a one-day rotation. You, as a patrol officer, work that position once a month. And so it's approximate, but based on the number of officers that we have and, people being on light duty, you'll spend one day up there per month.
And what is it that you're trying to, what is it that you do?
So when you're working that position, you're handling all the walk-ins. Somebody has a question, we've done fingerprints, and then you take all the contacts by phone. And, I mean, is there any rhyme or reason to all the different types of calls you can get during that? No.
I want to take you to December 14th. I mean, you know why you're here to testify, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I want to take you to December 14th of 2018, and you know which phone call I'm talking about. Did you receive a phone call from an individual named Christine Cahill?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Do you remember about what time? Was that morning, afternoon, evening?
It was evening after 5 p.m.
What was the nature of that phone call?
She was calling in regards to her son, Bryan. She wanted us to know that he was off his medications, had a firearm, threatened to kill her, and she wanted to make us aware of this and to seek help with what she could do to try to keep people safe.
Okay. So let's break that down. Around 5 p.m., you get a phone call from someone who identifies themselves as Christine Cahill.
Correct.
Okay. And the subject of the call is her son, Bryan Cahill.
Correct.
All right. She let you know that he is off his medication.
Mm-hmm.
She let you know that he had access to weapons.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
Correct.
And who was it that he was threatening at that time?
Her.
Okay. And what was the threat?
To kill her.
Okay. What can you do as a police officer in response to someone saying, I've got someone who's off their meds, has access to firearms, and is making threats?
So you have to further investigate to find out how delayed is something like this. We can't just immediately take someone without getting further information. If there's not an immediacy, if the threat was made 12 hours before, there's not an immediacy where we can go take someone into protective custody.
So based on what she told you, just that I've got someone off their medication,
Mm-hmm.
they have access to a weapon and are threatening to kill me, you also were aware she wasn't living in Frisco.
Correct.
Okay. I mean, can you just go out there, drive over to La Valencia, one street over, and go arrest him?
No.
I mean, just kind of throw away the Constitution, break in his door, pull him out, put him in cuffs. You can't do that.
Correct.
Okay. How does that make you feel?
Powerless.
Right?
Yeah.
But that's the way it needs to be, right? Because that could be just as true as it is false.
Right. Agreed.
All right. In response, let me ask you this. Did you take that seriously?
Yes.
Were you concerned at the time when you got that phone call?
Yes.
What did you tell her about in response to that fear as far as what she could do at that time to help you?
So I explained the process to her step by step of how you could apply for what's called a mental health warrant. You take the circumstances that are at hand, write it on an affidavit, and there's a division within the Collin County Court that you can present it to a judge, and the judge would issue, like any other warrant, a warrant for a mental health arrest or a mental health evaluation to be done.
And is that a pretty standard operating procedure when you have someone call in with a family member who's a mental health consumer? Pretty standard for the police to instruct them, this is how to go about for us to start the process?
Yes.
That's something you do many times when you get phone calls like that?
Correct.
Was there any reason in that phone call for you to believe she did not understand the words you used?
No.
Was there any reason in that phone call for her for you to believe that she did not understand exactly what you had told her and how to go about that mental health warrant?
I believe she understood.
And so the jury understands when someone does that, and our mental health court issues that warrant, that then goes to Frisco if it's within Frisco, and we have Frisco officers who will actually serve that warrant?
Correct.
Were you ever asked to go serve a warrant on Bryan Cahill in the La Valencia apartment?
No.
Let's fast forward 3 months. Were you working in Frisco on March 29th of 2019?
Yes.
Were you working when dispatch started going out that we had a trooper who was shot in the La Valencia apartments in Frisco?
I was in training that day, So I was responding from training, for clarification, so there's no misunderstanding. I was in a training class in McKinney, but I was employed by Frisco that day. So yes.
And do you remember what were you being trained on?
It was a DWI courtroom courtroom testimony class.
Were you in the same class with Brent Downing that day?
I was.
Okay, all right. I didn't know that. We hadn't talked about that. So were you dispatched to La Valencia at that point, or yes, or?
So I'm on what we call a containment team. Our SWAT team has multiple layers. There's the SWAT, which is an entry team. There's what's called containment. We're a quick response team, and we hold what is considered the interior perimeter. And then there's negotiations. I'm on the containment team. So I responded to, we received a page or notification, that there was a trooper shot, and it was pretty much, it was all hands on deck with a barricaded subject.
Needless to say, that was a big call out for the Frisco Police Department, one of our medium-sized agencies. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, on the containment team, are you outfitted with body armor?
Yes.
On the containment team, are you outfitted with long guns?
Yes.
Judge, I think I may actually use that pointer. If I may approach?
Yes.
And so when we're talking about this incident, were you made aware that as part of trying to keep people safe in that area, part of the North Tollway was actually shut down? Were you aware of that?
I did not know that at the time.
What about Lebanon? Did you know whether Lebanon was shut down?
I believe, I recall part of Lebanon was shut down, and I recall dozens of police cars out there.
Okay. Were you part of the team that was actually sent to the Montessori school to try to get children to their parents?
No.
Where were you located as far as the containment team? And if you would, let's talk about that. What is a containment team?
So we are the inner perimeter to keep people out. There was a gentleman that kept coming out and trying to see what was going on, and I had to keep him inside of his apartment. It's to maintain integrity of a crime scene and to make sure that there is safety being observed by all parties, including ones that, want to see what's going on and don't know how much danger they're putting themselves into.
And were you actually aware that we had to take SWAT operators off to pull people out of their apartments because shots were being fired through drywall?
Yes.
And that's why it was important for you, even though you may not be outside this apartment, but within this area, if shots are being fired, to have body armor to protect yourself.
Absolutely.
All right. During that time, did you play any other roles with regards to our SWAT operators out there?
Yes. So
what role did you play?
I was positioned on multiple locations on that interior perimeter, and at one point I volunteered to go and take batteries and supplies, food supplies, water to the operators up on the third floor.
During that time when you worked containment, did you hear gunfire?
Yes.
Just one or two shots or multiple times?
I heard multiple shots.
I'm just going to ask you, as a police officer, how did it make you feel having your fellow men and women from Frisco in harm's way that day?
Awful. When I went to the third floor, there was one of the guys I went to the academy with, and I remember looking at him and telling him, "Man, be careful. This is what they talked about. These are the days that they trained us for." And I mean, I remember sitting next to him at church and his family, and it's terrifying.
Did you ever connect that phone call from Christine Cahill about Bryan Cahill at La Valencia Apartments when you were out there on that scene with your body armor on, watching your friends be in harm's way?
Yes.
I'll pass the witness.
Officer Steenza, in your career with the Frisco Police Department, have you ever participated in serving one of those mental health warrants?
Yes.
So what happens when a mental health warrant is sworn? The person who wants to swear it out comes to the courthouse and speaks to the mental health judge and files an affidavit, and if the judge finds the affidavit sufficient, he issues a mental health warrant, right?
Correct.
And then that comes into your hands or another officer's hands, and you go find the person and serve the warrant.
Correct.
And where do you take them?
To the facility that is listed on that warrant.
So the judge designates a hospital where they're supposed to go to.
Correct.
When you have served those warrants, what hospital have you taken people to?
I've taken people to Green Oaks, down in Dallas. I've taken people to the facility here in Frisco, Haven Behavioral. There's other places, but those are the two that stick out to me the most.
Right. And so you deliver the person there to the designated facility and then turn them over to the designated facility, right?
That's correct.
Do you follow up on that afterward?
Personally, I don't.
All right. Do you know how long they stay there?
No.
Do you know what is done with them while they're there?
They receive assistance in some regard for mental health.
Your work in this as a police officer is, number one, to inform people that are concerned about what they can do, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
And then if the judge feels that a mental warrant should be issued, then you go and serve it and take them to the place where the judge tells you to take them, right?
Correct.
And so your involvement is limited to those two rather narrow things.
That is correct.
Thank you, Mr. Steenza. No further questions, Your Honor.
No further questions. Is this witness released?
By the state. He is released.
Thank you, sir. You're free to stay or go, whatever you'd like to do.
Thank you.
Let's go ahead and take our morning recess. Please be back in the jury room in 10 minutes.
All right.
All right, we'll be in recess for 10 minutes. Sure. Anytime. Very few of them do. I know they're. No, but especially on cases like that where Bubba is retained, he's getting paid, so he doesn't have any excuse for not doing something like an order. I understand, like, it may not I enjoy standing up there and having a taller view to point this out for me. Can we have the next witness come forward, please? Sir, please come up to the bench to be sworn. Raise your right hand for me. Do you swear or affirm that your testimony Please be seated. State, please call your next witness. This witness has been sworn.
Hello, my name is Sean Allen. I'm an officer with the Frisco Police Department.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Colony, Texas, so not too far from here.
And how did you end up being a police officer?
Something that I've always been interested in and always wanted to do, and then eventually just took the steps to make that happen.
How long have you been a police officer?
About 4 years.
And has that always been with Frisco PD?
Yes, sir.
That's where you started?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Since you have been at Frisco PD, what roles have you played within the police department?
So primarily patrol. I've done that on night shift the whole time, and then I'm also on the SWAT team.
Okay. How long have you been on the SWAT team?
A little over a year now.
Okay. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I want to take you to January 11th of 2019. You know what you're here to testify about, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. January 11th, 2019 in the evening, what was your responsibility that evening?
So that night I was working as the desk officer.
And the jury's heard a little bit about that. Is that where you're answering the phone and dealing with walk-ins?
Yes, just being available at the PD for non-emergency calls or...
Did you receive a call from an individual named Christine Cahill on January 11th of 2019?
Yes.
What was the nature of that call?
So she called. She was concerned about her adult son had made some statements to her over a voicemail that she believed were concerning, just due to the nature of what he said.
Okay. So when she called you, did she sound like she was concerned?
Yes, sir.
Did it sound like a serious concern to you?
Yes.
Okay. How do you handle that when someone calls you and you believe that they have a serious concern? How do you do that? Do you want more information or little information?
No. So anytime there's a credible concern or threat, we want as much information as possible. So what I did is I immediately informed dispatch that we need to send units out there because I'm stationary behind a desk at this time. Mm-hmm. Like, hey, we need people on scene now to make sure that. To verify what she's saying or at least try to talk to the individual. Now,
backing up, when she tells you that she's got this concern, do you ask her questions? Do you say, well, tell me more? What can you tell me about him? What can you tell me about the nature of the disturbance? What can you tell me about weapons? Do you ask those types of questions?
Yes, sir.
Did you do that on January 11th of 2019?
Yes, sir.
And did you actually, and we'll get into why this kind of escalated, but did you actually write kind of a full narrative on that night?
Yes, sir.
That incident?
Yes, sir. I took a full report on it.
Okay. And the purpose of that report is part of that to memorialize what you're told by that caller?
Correct.
Okay. If at any time while we're talking I ask you a question and you'd like to refresh your memory on your report, please let me know and I'll bring it up to you.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Was she able to tell you where her adult son... Well, did she tell you what her adult son's name was?
Yes, sir.
What was it?
It was Bryan Cahill.
Okay. Did she tell you where he lived?
Yes.
Where did he live?
It was the La Valencia apartment complex.
Do you remember what apartment she told you?
I believe it was 431, but not for sure.
she tell you whether or not he had ever been diagnosed with anything?
Yes, she stated that he'd been diagnosed as bipolar.
Okay. As part of your, I mean, I'm sure there was a time where police officers weren't really well-versed in mental health, but when nowadays, as part of your training, how to deal with, one, encounters with mental health consumers, but also family members of mental health consumers.
Sure. Yes, sir.
Okay. And so when you heard the word bipolar, that let you know maybe a little bit of a different situation.
Correct.
Okay. So she gave you that diagnosis. Did you ask whether he had access to firearms?
Yes.
And did she tell you whether he had access to firearms or not?
She stated that she believed he had access to a pistol.
Okay. Did you ask, or did she tell you who his threats were directed at?
Yes, sir. She said his threats were directed towards his neighbors, and then also towards her.
Okay. So let's break that down a little bit. She tells you that he has threatened her.
Correct.
Okay. Now, that threat, do you remember what the threat was to her?
It was to kill her.
Okay. Then let's go to the neighbors. Did she tell you what the threat was that he made to her regarding her neighbors?
She said that he told her that he was going to shoot his neighbors.
Okay. So not just Christine that night, threats were being made that he was going to kill the neighbors around him.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did she tell you, or did you ask, did you learn what he believed about his neighbors at that time?
Yes, at that time he believed that his neighbors were poisoning his apartment with gas and poisoning his food.
So when you hear that, I've got somebody who's a mental health consumer, I've got somebody who has access to firearms, and someone who's making threats not only to his mother, but his neighbors in an apartment complex, did you take that seriously?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You have a lot of options when you take those phone calls in deciding how to respond to them. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. One, you can just tell that person, hey, here's how to get a mental health warrant. Help us help you, right? That's one option.
Correct.
Okay. But that wasn't the option you chose that night based on those threats, was it?
No, sir.
Okay. What did you do in response to those threats above that information?
I believe that the best course of action that night was to send multiple units out there to basically try to address this individual immediately. I didn't feel comfortable with kind of leaving it up to chance, saying, hey, call this number. I thought it was something where we needed to go out there immediately.
I mean, did it scare you when you heard, I've got somebody who has access to firearms and he's talking about killing multiple people?
Yeah, I think that's, a scary moment because there's so much unknown.
Okay, so who do you send that information to?
So I contacted dispatch, and they sent out multiple units. I believe it was 5 of us total that went. Okay,
so you're sitting at the desk. You've got, and so the members of the jury, like when you first walk into Frisco Police Department, over to the right, is that where in the front lobby, that's where the desk is?
Yes, sir.
And it's kind of just a clear glass with one of those little, portals you speak through, and that's the desk. That's where you are.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So dispatch is going to send multiple squads to that location.
Correct.
And really, your job in a typical situation would be to stay there at that desk, right?
Correct. Normally, I wouldn't leave.
But this wasn't normal, was it?
No, sir.
Okay. So tell us what you ended up doing and where you ended up going.
So I believed it was, such a credible threat, and a phone call from Mom that I contacted my supervisor at the time and asked him to pick me up. That way, it could be on scene because I spoke to the mother directly, so I wanted to make sure that I was on scene and available to provide with information they needed real time.
Okay, so how did you end up getting there?
Corporal Lim picked me up and drove me over there.
How long did it take you to get over to La Valencia? Is that very far from the police officers?
It's about a mile south, so not long, a couple of minutes maybe.
Were the other officers already there when you got there?
I don't recall.
Okay. Did you guys have some type of like briefing moment once you got to those apartments?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this: Did you ask the mom what kind of car the defendant drove so that you would know whether he was there or not?
Yes, sir.
Were you able to confirm whether that car was there or not?
Yes, sir. We confirmed it was in the parking lot.
Okay. Now, are you on the phone with mom this whole time, or is it kind of back and forth, or what?
Kind of back and forth. Corporal Lim and I worked together in the same car, kind of speaking with her. One of us was speaking with her, and one of us was relaying information to the other officers. Okay,
so the way it ends up working is you and Corporal Lim are in the car. If you need to talk to mom, you're doing so. Then Corporal Lim has the ability to relay that to the other officers.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so what do the other officers do? What's their role?
So they were there, one, to keep eyes on the apartment, and two, they ended up trying to make contact at the door of the apartment.
Okay. And what's the goal in making contact, if you know?
The goal is just to try to speak to the individual, to verify if these are credible threats, to see if there's something that we can kind of step in and assist with.
And let's say, for instance, that if you had been able to, or not even in this case, if you make contact with an individual, and in that conversation, not disregarding, actually being able to also use what you've been told from an outside source, but if you make contact with someone, and from that conversation, you're able to tell this person's not all there, for whatever reason, this person, in your mind, you believe is a danger to themselves or others, are you able to do what we call an APAL at that point?
Yes, sir. Okay,
and I know it doesn't stand for exactly, but you're arresting someone without a warrant because you now have probable cause that they are a danger to themselves or others.
So we're taking them into protective custody, yes, sir.
Okay. And then what do you do with that individual? Where do you take them?
So we would transport them immediately to the nearest mental health facility that can provide them services, so they can be checked out by professionals.
Absolutely. And that may not solve the long-term problem, but it solves that problem that night, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so is that what those officers were hoping to do, is at least make contact with this person? Maybe in that contact, we either say it's not true or we say, yeah, it's true, and maybe this is the person we need to take in.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Are you aware whether or not that contact was ever made, whether Bryan Cahill ever walked out that door?
Yeah, we attempted contact at the door, or the other officers did, and we were unable to make any sort of contact inside. Did you also ask for his cell phone number from the mom? Yes, sir.
And were attempts made to call him on his cell phone?
Yes, sir.
Okay. During that interaction, while you've got officers up there, your corporal sitting next to you, and we're going to talk to Corporal Lim in a second, so don't feel like you need to answer for him. And while you're talking to the defendant's mom, was there ever a moment where you were able to confirm he knew police were outside his door?
Yes, sir.
How did that happen?
So she actually called us back and informed us. This was after officers tried to make contact by knocking on the door. We attempted calling him. She called back to let us know that her son just called her back and said, hey, police are at my door. If they come back here, I'm going to end it.
Okay. So just to be clear, she's relaying to you, one, her son recognizes police officers.
Yes, sir.
And two, if you all go back up there, he's making the threat. Did you feel like that was towards you, towards himself, towards her? Who did you believe that threat to be against at that point?
At the time, I believed us.
Okay. It wasn't, I'm going to end it as in like, I can't live this way anymore. It was, if they come up, I'm going to end it.
Correct.
Okay. All right. And in all fairness, that also could have meant Mom, if you let those police officers come back here, I'm going to take my own life. Could have.
Correct.
Okay, so end it could have been towards him, end it could have been towards y'all.
Yes, sir.
But at that time, did you take, at least in your mind, did you take that it could be a threat to police officers if they went back upstairs?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And was that relayed to your corporal, and was that relayed to the team?
Yes.
Okay. Now, like I said, we're going to talk to Corporal Lim in a second. He was in charge. He was the decision maker that night. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Was that a scary situation for you as officers, hearing that you've got someone who has access to weapons and is making a statement like, I'm going to end it?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. I don't know if you know or you have an opinion on it, but in your training and experience, is an apartment complex a real bad area for police officers to get into confrontations with individuals?
It's probably one of the worst situations, yes, sir.
Not only because there's other people around, but also because it is a very small area in which to protect yourself. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Bullets can punch through those walls real easy.
Very easily.
So the decision's made not to go back up there and start a confrontation. Is that correct?
Correct.
Do you have further conversation with Christine Cahill, the mom?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What's the purpose of that conversation?
So we weren't able to obviously make contact. So they don't want to leave it there. We want to try to at least provide assistance any way we can. So I called her back, and one of her other sons was also on the phone, and I explained to them the process of applying for a mental health warrant.
And the jury's already heard about this, but did you walk her through where to go, kind of what the criteria is, the person being a danger to themselves or others, and then that decision can be made, and then you would have the power to actually go pick somebody up once a judge looks at it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did you have any reason to believe that she did not understand what you were telling her?
No, sir.
In fact, did she respond to you in a positive way with regards to getting a mental health warrant?
Yes, sir. She said she was going to apply for it, I believe Monday.
Okay. Did you actually even go further and give her life path information, or was that Corporal Lim?
It was one of us. I can't remember if it was myself or him.
Okay. And so she said, I hear you, I understand you, I'm going to go do that Monday.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I forgot to ask you this. You have gone through with the jury that she had told you that he threatened to kill her. Did she say that, or do you remember, did she talk to you about him threatening to kill his brother or leaving messages on his brother's phone either?
No, sir.
Okay. All right. She had told you he's threatening to kill his neighbors, right? Do you remember asking her or her just volunteering whether or not he had ever threatened to kill anyone before?
Yeah, she said the reason she believed this was a legitimate threat was because he's never threatened to kill anyone before.
Okay, so on January 11th of 2019, she tells you, a member of the Frisco Police Department, that the defendant has never threatened to kill anyone before.
That's correct.
Was a CIT referral done based on this incident?
Yes, sir.
If you would, describe to the jury, what is a CIT referral?
Sure. So a CIT referral is something that we can attach to a report. And what that does is it sends the report over to our CIT team, like our crisis intervention team, and it allows them to follow up with the individual at a later date to make sure that they're getting the resources they need.
We didn't want to, after this kind of a situation, we didn't want to just leave it there. We wanted a follow-up.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I forgot to ask Officer Steensma this, so I'm going to ask you in case you, but do you remember there being a mental health, and I don't know the right terms, but kind of a mental health flag on that address after Aaron Steensma ended up talking to Christine Cahill?
Yes, there was an alert on the house, or the apartment, sorry.
And was that something else that you, when you saw that, taking everything into consideration, also kind of heightened, this is a serious deal?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you. I'll pass the witness.
Hey, Officer Allen, how are you today?
Good morning, sir.
All right, so the statements that Mr. Cahill's mother reported to you were left for her in a voicemail message. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Not an actual voice call between them where he was speaking to her and she was speaking back to him.
That's correct.
Did she tell you when the voicemail message was left?
I don't recall, sir.
All right, because your interaction with her was January 11th, 2019, starting at like 5:59 in the evening, so starting at 6 p.m., right?
Yes, sir.
What time were you and Corporal Lim and the other officers actually out at the scene?
I don't know off the top of my head, but that's should be in our report.
All right, well, so one of the reports indicates 17:59, that would be 5:59 p.m., and then another place, it says 20:09, which would be 8 p.m., so like 2 hours later.
Yes, sir.
All right, so that's how long it took to get the team assembled and go to the apartment?
I'm not sure what you're looking at right now, but depending on the time that the call was cleared, that could be the time it took to contact the individual or attempt to take down all the information and write the report.
All right, I mean, you went to the scene with Corporal Lim and with 3 other officers, right?
Yes, sir.
How long were you all out there, outside the door and back and forth on the phone before you said, all right, we've done all we can do here and left?
I don't know for sure.
All right. Can you give us any sense of how long it was? Was it a few minutes? Was it a couple hours? What can you say?
I'd say probably about an hour at least.
All right. So for an hour, you were right in the vicinity of that door?
Yes, sir. Well, I was downstairs. I was never up at the door.
And by what means did the officers attempt to contact Mr. Cahill inside the apartment? You said that they tried to contact him at the door and they also called him on the cell phone. What did they do, just walk up and knock on the door?
Yes, sir.
All right. Was there any conversation through the closed door?
No, sir.
All right. So his mother told you he'd been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And Mr. Mitchell used a term I was interested in, a mental health consumer. What is a mental health consumer?
That's a code that we can put an alert on a home. It's just coded as a mental health consumer.
All right, so that's a police term, right? Mental health consumer.
I think that's a general term that we use at our police department.
All right, and what that means is a person who is a mental health consumer has some history of some kind of mental health issues.
Some sort of mental illness.
All right. Okay, why don't you just call him a mentally ill person?
I don't know. I guess you'd have to ask whoever made that code.
All right. They tell you the terms to use and you use them, right?
Correct.
All right. He told his mother that his neighbors were trying to poison him with gas and to poison his food, or that they were attempting to gas his apartment and to poison his food, right?
Yes, sir.
Did those sound like delusional beliefs to you?
I don't know at the time, sir.
I mean, you don't really think his neighbors were trying to put gas in his apartment or poison his food.
I think that's what he believed.
Right, but you don't think that was really happening, do you?
Well, you never know, so we always go out to investigate.
Well, you weren't going out there to investigate what his neighbors were doing to him. You were going out there to investigate what had been reported about him to you by his mother, right?
Correct.
Okay. All right. So the CIT, the Crisis Intervention Team, are they employed inside the police department, or are they from other agencies outside the police department?
They are specific officers within the Frisco Police Department that have additional training in that field.
So they're all commissioned officers?
Yes, sir.
All right. And what is the role of the Crisis Intervention Team? What do they do when they receive a referral from a regular line patrol officer?
I couldn't tell you, sir. I'm not part of the team.
All right. Well, I understand you don't know every detail of it, but based on your 4 years' experience in the department, generally, what does the crisis intervention team do?
They're used as an additional step to reach out to an individual in need to try to provide some sort of assistance to, keep our city safer.
All right. How do they do that, if you know?
I'm not sure.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Allen. No further questions, Your Honor.
Thanks, sir.
Nothing further from the state. Is this witness released by the state?
He is released.
Sir, you are free to stay or go, whatever you'd like to do.
Thanks, sir.
State, call your next witness, please.
State calls Sang Lim.
Sir, could you please come up to the bench to be sworn? Sir, raise your right hand for me. Do you swear or affirm that your testimony will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Please have a seat.
Good morning.
Good morning.
If you would, please introduce yourself to the jury.
Hello, I'm a detective, or now Detective Sang Lim with the Frisco Police Department.
And if you would, detective, where are you from?
I was born and raised in Southern California, got to Texas as fast as I could, and spent a little bit of time in Georgia in between.
If you would, for me, will you pull that mic a little bit closer to you? Don't too close or don't hit you, but just... All right.
Better?
And then just as we're talking, make sure you're speaking in that mic.
Yes, sir.
Prior to being in law enforcement, what other jobs have you held?
I was an EMT in California, got my license there, worked on a private ambulance company for about 6 months, and then worked in a hospital for the last 6 for that first year. And then after that year, I moved to Georgia and worked in an emergency room for about 5 years before moving to Texas as an EMT.
And why become a police officer?
When we moved to Texas, the rules were a little bit different on how you would work in an emergency room, and so I wanted to stay in the public service sector and decided to expand my searches, and police officer was one of those, and ended up working for the city of Frisco.
And how long have you been with Frisco?
I started in October of 2014.
Okay, so 6 going on 7?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What different roles have you had within the Frisco Police Department?
When I started, I was on night shift patrol, and then from there, I became a corporal. During that time, I got asked to be on the SWAT team, or tried out for it and made it there. Other than that, I moved into CID about 2 years ago, about a year and a half ago, and that's where I'm working now currently.
And what does that entail, being in CID?
I'm a detective. I work property crimes. We work closely, more specifically with vehicle theft and vehicle burglaries is pretty much what I'm assigned in theft cases here and there.
If you would, explain to us what it means to be a corporal. What does that mean?
Corporal is a position that you apply for, and once you become a corporal, you're basically a frontline supervisor out on patrol. I work night shift most of the time, or pretty much all the time I was a corporal. And in my role, it was filling in different spots that needed a supervisor in sections that didn't have a sergeant at the time is mostly what I did when I was a corporal.
And so that puts you in a position if there's a call for service and we have men and women out there, if there's not a sergeant, you're the senior person kind of making the calls and making decisions.
For the most part, yes.
On January 11th of 2019, were you working as a corporal at that time?
I was.
Okay. And do you remember getting information relayed to you about a call that Officer Allen had received?
Yes. So I believe Officer Sean Allen, now corporal, was working on the desk that night, and I was corporal of the section that he was also working. When he called me and kind of filled me in on what was going on, I decided to go pick him up, and then we got I believe it was a welfare concern of some sort, that somebody was threatening to harm other people in the apartment complex, and that's what we got called to. And so we requested a few more officers to go to the apartment complex, and then we responded there as well.
Now, I've got to ask you, in Frisco, is that normal? If you have an officer working the desk who takes in a call, is it normal for a corporal to go pick him up and have him go out on scene when you have other men and women patrolling the area? Is that a normal thing to do?
It's not typical. It's something that we decided to do because of the nature of the call.
I was a prosecutor in Dallas for 15 years. I don't ever remember a sergeant going and picking up someone who took a phone call to take them out to the scene.
Mm-hmm.
Was this a scary type of call for y'all?
It definitely required a little bit more higher level of response. Maybe not level is a good word, but it required more response from patrol. And so the more bodies, the better.
Now, at that time, had you received special training with regards to, were you part of the CIT at that time?
Yes, I was.
Okay, so had you received special training with regards to answering calls of a mental health nature?
Yeah, I wouldn't say anything on top of what the normal patrol officer does. I would just say I had a little bit more experience. My experience as an EMT helped me be a part of the CIT team, and then also just the classes that we were able to take in recognizing mental illnesses and things of that nature.
And what's the goal of having that? What's the goal of having a CIT division within your police department? So
our crisis intervention team basically we're assigned cases after a CIT referral is completed, which basically it's if no one needs to be committed that night or can be committed that night under an emergency, APOW is what we call it, we do a CIT referral to follow up with that person or their family to make sure that they have been receiving or can receive the resources that they need.
And it's so important within a jurisdiction that we try to get people the intervention they need because it keeps us all safe.
Yes, definitely.
I mean, we're getting to the point now in society where our police agencies are creating these groups within them just to try to keep people on track so that we don't have mass shootings. We don't have some of the worst of the things we see. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Let's go back. So back to January 11th of 2019. Mm-hmm. You go pick up Sean Allen. What happens next?
After that, I believe Officer Allen was on the phone with Bryan's mother while we were responding to the scene. So he was on the phone and I was driving. Once we got there, we had officers Folk, Menifee, Corporal Shirley on scene with us, and we were trying to devise a plan on how we would try to handle the situation.
Well, let me ask you this, especially as a SWAT operator, is an apartment a very safe place to try to have a confrontation with an individual?
Definitely not.
Were you a SWAT operator? Were you with Frisco PD when we had the Richardson incident with
Officer Sherrard? No, I was not at the time.
So talk me through kind of how that goes. Y'all are trying to devise a plan. What are your concerns? What are you thinking about? What are you trying to accomplish at that point?
I think at that point we didn't know exactly where the apartment was in relation to where we were. We just knew that we were off to the side of the apartment. We knew what kind of vehicle Mr. Cahill drove, so I believe Corporal Shirley checked the parking lot for it and did end up seeing it there. After we kind of decided that he was most likely in the apartment, we had to decide whether or not we would attempt to go talk to him or whether we would just try to talk to Mom and have Mom talk to him. I know we tried to call him multiple times there. He wasn't answering our phone calls. And then we did get a phone call from his mom saying that, hey, I see police officers are here. If you guys try, I can't remember exactly what the wording was, but if they try to come up and talk to me or do something, then I don't remember exactly what he said, but it was more of a putting ourselves in danger if we were to try to go talk to him.
Did you have to make a decision at that point what the safest route was for everybody?
Yes, we did.
And what was the decision? What was the decision that night as far as any further action?
We decided to leave it be because if we did go force the issue, we'd be putting ourselves and him in danger, and plus the residents around him. And we can't just go break down somebody's door because somebody says, hey, they're threatening to shoot somebody or do something like that. We decided to try to make contact multiple times. After those all failed, we told the mom to let us know if anything escalates, and then we cleared the scene from there, and I believe Officer Allen did a CIT referral after that. And the jury's kind of heard, and you've told us kind of what a CIT referral is. So was contact made again later to Christine Cahill, the defendant's mom? Yes, so I was actually assigned that CIT referral. I called her, left a message, and she called me back, and we had a short conversation on the phone, and I believe I remember her saying...
And Corporal, let me stop you there for a second. So the night that y'all went out there, that was January 11th of 2019?
Yes.
Do you remember when you made that follow-up phone call?
I believe it was on the 22nd of January.
January 22nd, 19, so 11
yes.
days later, you call Christine Cahill?
Yes.
Okay. You said you left a voicemail, then she called you back?
Yes, she did.
Tell the jury what she told you at that point.
I can't remember the exact conversation, but somewhere along the lines of that he was now taking his medication and that he's doing better.
Okay. Would it help you to look at the report?
Yes.
Refresh your memory. May I approach, Judge?
Yes.
Does that look like the report on January 22nd on that referral?
Yes, it is.
Okay, then let me ask you specifically. Do you remember, and you may not, but do you remember whether or not you were asking her questions or whether you just kind of said, hey, tell me what's going on, and then she just told you everything? Do you remember?
That I can't recall.
That's okay. Were you concerned whether he was on his medication at this point or not?
Yes.
That's a big part of the intervention team is saying, hey, does he have what he needs? Are we getting back on track, right?
Yes, exactly.
So with regards to him being on medication or not, what was her response on January 22nd with regards to his medication?
She stated that he was now taking his medication again.
Okay, so January 22nd, he's back on track, he's taking medication.
Yes.
Okay. What was her response with regards to firearms?
She was now not sure if there was a firearm actually in the apartment or not, or if he was in possession of one.
Okay, so, and you now know, I mean, like you've seen the reports, you now know in December 14th of 2018, she's telling police officers, off medication, threatening to kill, firearms, right?
Yes.
January 11th, that night y'all went out there, off medication, threatening to kill, firearms.
Yes.
Okay, 11 days later, she tells you, on medication, I don't even know if he has guns, right?
Yes.
At that point, and we've heard from Officer Steensma, we've heard from Officer Allen. I mean, did you go over with her, hey, this is what a mental health warrant is, this is, if something comes up, this is how we can help you?
I don't recall if I talked to her specifically about a mental health warrant, how to apply for one. I do know that we've talked to her in the past about it. I know I do, whenever I do a CIT referral, we always give them life paths information, which is a resource from Collin County to get people with mental illnesses some sort of help, at least a way to either reach out to somebody or talk to somebody. So I guess if mental health warrants have been explained to her twice, now you're talking about life paths. That's going to be the third conversation from Frisco to her with regards to trying to make sure that we keep everybody safe. Yes.
March 29th of 2019, were you a SWAT operator?
Yes.
Where were you stationed during the standoff at La Valencia Apartments?
I was at the stairwell closest to his apartment door.
If the jury has seen video of Officer Brent Downing breaking out a window, were you on that same team in that stairwell?
Yes.
In fact, were you one of the officers who had a long gun trained on his door?
I did.
Did you ever, during that standoff, connect the fact that you were back at the same apartment building, same apartment, as the one where the lady told you, I don't even know if he has access to firearms?
Yes.
Judge, at this time, we will offer State's Exhibit number 361 under business record affidavit. Prior notice has been given to the defense.
No objection.
States 361 is admitted.
Permission to use the Elmo?
Granted.
Permission to publish, Judge.
Granted.
Ladies and gentlemen, State's Exhibit 361 is an affidavit from Aaron Johnson, the custodian of records for the the county clerk involuntary mental health commitments, wherein she states they have 0 records during the period of December 2008 through March 30th of 2019 for any application for a court order for mental health treatment for Bryan Matthew Cahill. We'll pass a witness.
Corporal Lim, let me ask you a little bit more about the whole crisis intervention team. That is a team within the Frisco Police Department, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
So everybody on the crisis intervention team works for the Frisco Police Department, is that correct?
From my understanding, yes.
And they are all commissioned police officers?
At the time, yes.
All right.
I'm not sure about now.
All right, so how many total officers work for the Frisco Police Department? About?
Right now, about 230.
And how many are on the crisis intervention team?
That I couldn't tell you. I don't know.
Well, you know that you're on it, right?
Yes.
And how many other officers do you personally know who are on the team with you?
I know there's about at least 11.
Do y'all get together all the time as one group for training, or not usually?
Not usually.
All right. So what's your role as a crisis intervention team member above and beyond what your regular role as a police officer would be?
The role of a crisis intervention team member is when there is a CIT referral completed, and not just in this case, but any case, we are assigned the follow-up. So we will either attempt to contact the person with the mental illness or a family member of some sort, and then give them more information or just to see what the status of how they're doing is now compared to when we actually respond to that call.
So I guess any officer can make a referral to the CIT team, right?
Any officer can do a CIT referral, yes.
And does that go directly to the team, or does that go through command channels? He refers to his command, and his command refers to the CIT command.
So once a CIT referral is completed, it's like any other report. It's reviewed by the frontline supervisor or a sergeant, and then it's assigned to the CIT sergeant, which was, I believe, Sergeant Holland at the time, and she assigns each CIT referral out to a CIT team member.
All right. So it's not a lateral referral. It goes up the chain to the supervisor of the person making the referral, across the chain to the command of the CIT team, and then down to the CIT member, right?
Yes, sir.
So that may be one reason why a referral is made on January 11th, but you don't hear about it till January 22nd.
As to why it took so long, I couldn't tell you why.
All right. But when you get the word from the CIT team commander, hey, you've got this referral, then you get on it, right?
Yes.
And what you did in this case was you telephoned the mom.
Yes.
Is that typically what you do to respond to one of these CIT referrals? Telephone the person involved?
Yes.
I mean, how often do you actually go see them or do anything more than make a telephone call?
Typically, if the reporting party lives out of the city, we'll make a phone call.
And Ms. Cahill lived out of the city, right?
Yes.
And you knew that?
Yes.
If she had lived in the city, you still probably would have called her.
Most likely.
All right. So what she told you was he was back on his meds and doing better, right?
Yes.
Did you ask her what meds he was getting back on?
No, I don't recall.
I mean, that would have meant more to you with your background than it might to me or someone else, right?
I think we're dealing, as a CIT member, it's more the condition of the person, not necessarily what the medications are.
But my point is, with all your training as an emergency medical technician and working in the emergency room for the years you did, the information about exactly what medication he was on or not on would have been more useful to you than to the average person. You agree with that or no?
I don't think so, because I don't, you could list off 50 different medications and I wouldn't know what they treated for the most part.
Right, okay. Anyway, you didn't find out anything more about his meds. She told you he was back on the meds. She told you he was doing better, and then that was the end of the inquiry.
As far as I can recall, yes.
Okay. So, tell me about LifePath. What is that?
It's basically a program or organization that is, I believe, funded by Collin County, and it's basically a phone number that you can call, and they can put you in touch with different resources, whether it's setting up therapy sessions or getting you in touch with a psychologist or something, or just somebody that you can talk to, whether it's a suicide line or something like that. LifePath is just a centralized place where you can call and they will give you resources that you need.
So, a person who is interested in LifePath services would call them and ask about them, right?
Typically, no. A lot of people don't know about LifePath. We have to give them that information, and once they have it, it's basically a phone number that you can call. Anytime I do a CIT referral or anything like that, I'll write their number on my business card and hand it to them. That way they have it, or I'll put it in their phone for them.
All right. So there isn't any way to, basically your suggestion that someone should call LifePath is a suggestion, right?
Yes, it's a way to get resources.
You don't have... There's no way to compel a person to call LifePath or to avail themselves of their services if they do call.
No.
So that night, January 11th, you were out at the scene about 3/4 of an hour. Would you agree with that or no?
It's possible. I couldn't tell you how long.
All right. There's somewhere in these reports, you guys are data heavy there at Frisco Police Department. It has an individual breakdown by individual officer of how long they were at the scene. Were you aware that that's in your report?
Yes, I do know that our call notes do have that information.
All right. So if I'm looking at it here and it says you were there 42 minutes and 44 seconds, you'd have no reason to disagree with that. Or do you want to see it? I'll be glad to bring it up.
No, I don't. I wouldn't disagree with that.
All right. And when you called her on the phone January 22nd, you spent about 10 minutes on the phone with her, right? Is that fair?
I don't know exactly how long the phone call was. That's how long I was on the call. Whether I called her and she called me back right then and there, that could have been the time difference. There's no way to tell.
So, other than contacting his mother, did you make any other take any other actions as part of the CIT referral?
No.
You didn't contact him, you talked to his mom, and then do you report back to the CIT supervisor or to the person who made the CIT referral what you've done?
I enter call notes into the CIT referral, and say that that referral is now closed.
And all those call notes are in the central computerized police records of Frisco, and anyone who's interested could look it up and see, right?
I believe so.
Okay. Thank you, Corporal Lim. No further questions.
Is this witness released?
State. He's released.
Thank you, sir. You're free to stay or go, whatever you'd like to do. State, call your next witness, please. Sir, please come up to the bench here to be sworn. Raise your right hand for me. Do you swear or affirm that your testimony will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth? So help you God. Please have a seat.
Good morning, Mr. Pence.
Good morning, Gita.
Will you please introduce yourself to the jury?
My name is Zachary Pence.
And where are you from, Zach?
I am from Arizona.
Okay. And how long have you lived in Texas?
It'll be just over 3 years now.
Let's go back to when you were in Arizona. What did you do in Arizona?
Before we moved here, I was a conductor for the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad. I was also a part-time mail carrier, and then eventually transitioned into working into full-time ministry.
So before you moved to Texas, had you lived your entire life or the majority of your life in Arizona?
The majority of it, yes, except for the 4 years I was in the Army.
Okay, so you were born there?
Born in Arizona, yeah. Raised until right after my 21st birthday is when I joined the military.
Gotcha. So you worked for BNSF, then you were a mail carrier, then you worked at a church there in Arizona. Where in Arizona were you when you worked for the church?
It was Flagstaff, Arizona.
Okay. What did you do for them?
I still am a media producer for that same church. We just had a campus out there, and once they were releasing that campus to become its own church, we felt led to move to Dallas.
And you talked a little bit about that you have some military experience. Tell the jury about that. When were you in the military?
I was in the military from 2006 until 2011, active duty. I joined as a 19-kilo Abrams armor crewman and was stationed in Fort Lewis.
Okay. And tell me what that means. What that means. You started as a what? Say that again?
I was an armor crewman.
Okay, and what is that job?
It basically trained to drive tanks. Eventually, as you gain experience and rank, you move up to being a loader, a gunner, or then eventually a tank commander.
And so, did you move through those ranks?
I did not, because in Fort Lewis there are no tanks. So I was actually placed with the infantry. And we are what they call a striker brigade, which is a light armored vehicle. There's multiple variants, but mostly I worked with the infantry.
Okay. And were you eventually stationed overseas?
Yes. In 2009, I deployed to Afghanistan, spent a year there.
When you got to Afghanistan, what was your job?
Our job initially was to seek out IED factories and disrupt the Taliban supply lines coming through the Arghandab River Valley.
Okay. And did you end up doing that job, or did you do something different?
We did, yeah. For the first 6 months, we were there. It was pretty intense. We experienced a lot of casualties, and yeah, we did. There was a lot of action there for sure.
Okay. Can you describe for the jury what the location was like in Afghanistan? I know we've talked about it, but kind of paint a picture for them of what that looked like, what kind of place you were living in.
Okay, so once we left Kandahar Airfield to our forward operating base, we were at a FOB where there had been only Canadian security forces that were there, just protecting the contractors who were building the FOB.
Okay. What is a FOB?
Forward operating base.
Okay,
so we had no intel in the area, and within, I would say, 4 or 5 days of us being there, we had our first full-blown firefight, first casualties, and then it was pretty much nonstop between July and December for us while we were there.
Okay. And you talked about firefight. Describe that. What was your day like when you were out there and there was firefight going on?
For the most part, it was just kind of, it felt like we were just waiting for them to just blow up one of our vehicles and wait for them to shoot at us and shoot back. That's just kind of how the Taliban operated over there. Because they knew if they tried to stand toe-to-toe with us in a full-blown firefight, they wouldn't. So unfortunately, that's how most situations started, by one of our vehicles getting hit by an IED, and then us returning fire, trying to track them down, and then by the time we're making any sort of progress, they've fled the scene.
And how old were you when you got to Afghanistan?
I was 20, just celebrated my 26th birthday when I got there.
Okay. So you were a young man?
Yes.
Was it scary being over there?
It was, yeah. It was scary, but also eye-opening for me personally to be in another part of the world and see how they live compared to how we get to live in the U.S.
And I know this sounds like a silly question, but when you would have those gunfights or you would hear gunfire, did it kind of bring a certain level of anxiety or mood, or was there something that happened to you psychologically when that kind of thing would happen?
I guess after the first firefight, it just became, I mean, they train you for it to be instinct when you take fire to return fire, but it doesn't really happen until, I mean, it didn't happen for me, at least until after the first firefight. It didn't become like automatic response to grab my weapon. The first time it was like shock, like, okay, this is really happening. Is this really happening? And then once you realize, okay, this is really happening, then you pick up your weapon and you start shooting.
So your training was all kind of in theory, right? Planning for those kinds of things that you would see over in Afghanistan, but it wasn't until that first time that had actually happened that you had to employ those techniques or those tactics.
Yes.
What was your training like?
So initially we were training for a deployment to Iraq. So we did a lot of urban combat training, clearing houses, hostage rescue situations, stuff like that. But then right before we were getting ready to deploy, we had our pre-deployment training, and our battalion commander had told us that our orders had changed, and that even though we spent the last 2.5 years training for urban combat, we were leaving in 4 months to go to Afghanistan.
Did you have to get some additional training in a very short period of time?
We did what we could to build up our cardio. That was pretty much all we could do. We did a lot of hiking, a lot of long distance running, and that's pretty much all we could do in that amount of time to train, is just get in the best physical shape that we could.
During your training, did you do a lot of work on firearm handling?
Yes, almost every day.
What was that like?
A lot of it was cleaning. A lot of it was just weapons familiarization, understanding the parts of a weapon, how it makes the weapon function. And then I would say at least once a week, at least once a week we're at a range shooting some sort of weapon, whether it be vehicle-mounted weapons, our personal weapons, whether it be an M4 or a handgun. Because as armed recruitmen, for us, handguns are more, because it's hard to pull an M4 out of a turret. And so when you have your handgun here in a situation where you need a firearm, handguns are more readily available than our M4s would have been in a situation like that.
And how long were you in Afghanistan?
A year.
Did you eventually come back home?
Yes.
After that? After having seen a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
And did you go back to Arizona?
No, not initially. When I got back from Afghanistan, I finished out my active duty enlistment in Washington State. And then at that time, jobs were kind of hard to find. And so tried to find something in Washington because we wanted to stay up there. It didn't work out. Ended up applying with the railroad and got the job in Arizona.
And you're saying we. Do you have a family?
I do. I'm married. I have 4 kids and 2 dogs and nutrition housers.
And were you married back when you were in the military?
That's a complicated question to answer. Yes, I was. I got married halfway through my deployment. When I went home for mid-tour leave, we had our wedding, and it's only by the grace of God that worked out timing-wise, because they don't tell you exactly when you're going home on mid-tour leave. They give you a window, and so we planned our wedding date based in that window. And I flew in on Friday and got fitted for my tux on Saturday and got married on Monday.
So your wife planned the whole entire wedding?
She did.
You just showed up?
Yep.
Sounds about right.
Yep.
So you get back after you come home, you go back and you work for BNSF, which is the railroad.
Yes.
And then you have a couple other jobs before you work for the church there in Flagstaff.
Yeah, so during my time with the railroad, I had a back injury, and taking time off of the railroad can become very complicated, and they decided that I couldn't prove that all of the time that I took off for my back injury was related to the injury. So they basically told me that I could no longer work for them, since they thought that I didn't want to work for them anyways. So after that, that's when I became a mail carrier. And I did that part-time and then started working for the church part-time. Yep.
And eventually, did the church there in Flagstaff change names or change hands, which then resulted in you moving to Texas?
Yes, yeah. We loved the pastors that we were working with there, but we just didn't feel like our time with the church that was based in Dallas was over with. And so sold our house and moved across the country.
And that's Covenant Church, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Very large church.
It is, yes.
And you did all of the, describe the kind of things that you did.
So my official job title is a media producer. I do a lot of the directing currently I do a lot of the directing for the online content that people who are streaming our services see. But I'm also involved in a lot of big hands-on projects like building video walls, projectors. I actually started out in audio, so I do a lot of audio projects too, mixing consoles and sound systems and stuff like that.
So you move across the country. Where was the first city that you moved to?
I moved to Frisco.
And what apartment did you live in there?
It was La Valencia, and it was apartment 422.
You said you have a wife and 4 kids. Tell me about your kids. How old are they?
My oldest is 17. His name is Aiden. He lives in Tucson with his mom. I do get to see him summer times and holidays. And then the other 3 live with us full time. We have Mason, who's 14, and then we have Madison, who is 9, and Taylor, who is 7.
And how many dogs do you have?
I have 2.
2 dogs.
Yep.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
Yes.
Back, I'm showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 365 through 379.
Okay.
Can you just flip through those really quick?
Mm-hmm.
Are those pictures of your apartment and the things in your apartment?
Yes.
Are these an accurate depiction of the apartment and the things in your apartment?
Yes.
Any alterations or deletions that make these inaccurate?
No.
State offers States Exhibit 365 to 379 after tendering same to defense counsel for objection.
No objection to any of these photographs.
States 365 through 379 are admitted.
Permission to publish on the state's computer, Your Honor?
Granted.
Okay, Zach, I want to walk through these pictures really fast with you. States Exhibit 365, is that your apartment building?
Yes.
What apartment building did you live in?
The second floor apartment right there.
Okay, and was that building 4 or?
That's building 4.
Building 4. And is your apartment right above those garage doors?
Yes. Unfortunately.
Why was it unfortunate?
They're loud.
That window above the garage doors, what was that window to?
That's my bedroom.
Okay, so the master bedroom?
Master bedroom.
And on the left-hand side of this photo, near the top in that corner, it looks like there's another window. Is that right?
That you're actually seeing the third floor apartment balcony. Okay. Our balcony is just below that. You can't really see it in that picture.
Okay. On that side of the building, what was that balcony leading into in your apartment?
The balcony leads out into, you can oversee part of the parking lot and that whole, well, it used to be a construction site. They're finished now.
How did you access the balcony? From what room?
From the dining room.
And is this your front door?
Yes, it is.
And you lived on the second floor, you said?
Yes.
And you mentioned your dining room. Are we looking at that dining room right there?
That's the dining room, yep.
And those double doors that are right beyond it, do those go to the balcony that overlook the construction site and more parking lot?
Yes.
There's another picture of that, is that right?
Yep.
Is this your kitchen?
Yes, it is.
And back here, we can see some of your kids' stuff on the refrigerator, is that right?
That's correct.
Their schoolwork?
Yep.
And is this the girls' room?
This is the girls' room.
Okay, and your daughter slept here?
Yes.
In this apartment complex, were there kids and families who lived there?
Yes.
Whose room are we looking at here?
This is my son Mason's.
And here we have your living room, is that right?
That's correct.
From that window, what do you see?
From that window, it's still the same as the balcony. You're still looking into what used to be the construction site, and then you can see into part of the parking lot as well.
And we can see that window right there. Is that from the living room?
Yes.
And looking out onto that parking lot?
Yes.
What room is this?
That's the master bedroom.
And this window looks out to the different part of the parking lot, right?
Yes.
That's above the garages looking down.
Yes.
And we have your closet here, is that right?
Yes.
Now, do you, or when you lived there, do you still live in the Valencia apartment?
No, we do not.
When you did live there, did you have a neighbor named Bryan Cahill?
Yes.
And I want to talk to you a little bit about what you observed of him, what you knew about him when you lived there, okay? Where did he live in relation to you? So if you're on the second floor and your bedroom is above those garages, where was he in comparison to you?
He was on the third floor and across the hallway.
Okay, so you'd have to go up the stairs, and it wasn't on this side, it was on the other side.
Right.
Now, you had a few interactions with him during the time that you lived there, is that right?
Yes.
How long did you live in that apartment complex?
15 months.
Okay. And during that time, did you notice some odd behavior from him?
Yes.
Do you remember a time when you were walking your dogs and you saw the defendant?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
My wife and I, we were walking the dogs, and there's like a strip of grass that separates two separate parking lots. You can see outside the bedroom window, we were walking in between there, and we noticed that Mr. Cahill was standing in his balcony in the corner and just watching us walk back and forth with the dogs.
Did that strike you as slightly strange?
It did, yeah.
What were you thinking when you saw that?
We were just kind of weirded out by it, like why is this guy just standing in the corner just staring at us?
Was there another time when your kids were out playing in the parking lot in front of those garages that something happened?
Yes. My wife and I, we were in the dining room getting ready to make dinner. The kids were out front riding their scooters, and our kids came inside and told us that he was trying to spit on them as they were riding their scooters back and forth underneath of his balcony.
Did it worry them that was going on?
Yeah, it did. It freaked them out. They came inside. We just told them to stay inside. We contacted the management.
So they're riding their bikes. How old were they at the time?
Let's see. It'd be 11, 7, and 5.
Okay.
Yeah.
11, 7, and 5. They're riding their bikes. He's on his balcony spitting at them.
Yeah.
It freaks them out. Did it freak you out?
Yeah, it did.
That's not normal, right?
No, it's not.
Did you notice that he would ever take things back and forth from his apartment to his car?
Yes, there would be times where I would see that he had like black trash bags full of stuff. Sometimes he would be taking them up to his apartment. Sometimes they'd be taking them down. And it was odd because it didn't look like they were full of trash. It just looked like they were like almost like blown up, like stuffed with stuffing or blankets or something like that. Yeah.
So weird, not anything that was offensive to you.
No.
But just strange.
Mm-hmm.
And you would sometimes see his mom bringing groceries back and forth, is that right?
Yeah.
Were there time periods when you would not see him or hear from him at all?
Yeah, there would be a week, sometimes more, where you wouldn't see him come or go at all.
In March of 2019, March 29th of 2019, were you still living in that apartment complex?
Yes, I was.
And that was a Friday. Tell us what you were doing that Friday.
That Friday, I had just got off work. I was actually supposed to go camping with one of my friends that night. And he called me as soon as I got in the parking lot and said, "Hey, it's supposed to rain tonight. I don't really want to go, but if you want to go, I'll go." And I was like, "Nah, it's not worth it. Let's just catch up. We'll do it another time." So I went inside, turned on Netflix, and was getting ready to watch a show when my wife called me. And
around what time was it that y'all decided that you weren't going to go camping?
It was probably about 2:30 or 3, somewhere in there.
Okay. And so you sit down on the couch, you're turning on Netflix. Is it that often that you get a quiet moment in your own apartment?
No.
No. Well, and any parent knows that usually there's something going on, right?
Yeah.
So,
yep.
And your wife was out with her friends having lunch.
Yeah, she went and had lunch with a friend. Yep.
Okay. And then you called your wife, or you got a call from her?
She called me. Yeah, she called me to let me know that lunch was great. She had a good time. She started talking about the things that they had talked about at lunch, and yeah.
And then what happened?
Then that's when I heard the gunshots.
But at first, when you heard the gunshots, which we now know were gunshots,
Yep.
did you know that that's what you heard?
I did know that there were gunshots, but because I'm in an apartment in Frisco, Texas, my mind didn't put the two and two together, so I just thought that it was noise from the construction site. So from there, got up to the window and looked out at the construction site, and everybody had gone home for the weekend. And I kept hearing them, and so I leaned closer into the window and I looked out to the left, and I could see Trooper Webb standing behind his vehicle with his gun drawn, and I could see that he was shooting his weapon.
Let me back up. So you hear something that you recognize as gunshots, but you think, of course not. It certainly couldn't be gunshots because I'm in my apartment.
Yeah.
You look out expecting to see construction going on.
Yeah.
But the construction site is empty.
Yeah.
And so then you look out your window. Which window did you look out to see Trooper Webb?
It was the far left window in the living room.
Okay. So that one?
Yep.
All right. So you look out that window, and you see that Trooper Webb is firing his weapon?
Yes.
What did you do then?
From there, I slowly made my way into the master bedroom, and I peeked through the blinds in the master bedroom, and I could see my neighbor laying down on the top of his car, firing shots back at the trooper.
When you say your neighbor, you're talking about Bryan Cahill.
Bryan Cahill, yes.
Do you remember, and if you don't, it's okay, do you remember if it was a long gun or a short gun?
At the time when I initially saw him shooting, he was shooting his handgun.
Did that change over the course of the time that everything transpired?
I think, no, I only saw him shooting the handgun, but I did observe later that there was a shotgun on the ground as well.
When you saw that your neighbor was shooting at Trooper Webb, what went through your mind?
It was a moment of shock, disbelief, but just based off of my interactions with Mr. Cahill before, I wasn't surprised.
So in the time period that you had been living there and the defendant was your neighbor, you see him laying on the top of his hood or the top of his car shooting at a trooper, and that wasn't surprising to you?
No.
Once you noticed all this going on, what did you decide to do?
I observed. Once I realized that it was the neighbor, I was still partially on the phone with my wife at the time, and she told me that she was pulling into the apartment complex, and I told her, no, you need to turn around, get out of here. There's a shootout happening right in front of the apartment. And after that, I put the phone down and went back into the living room and was observing Trooper Webb, and eventually saw that he had got shot.
When you saw that how did you notice that he had been shot?
He was hobbling behind his vehicle. It looked like he was trying to stay in cover behind his vehicle, kind of moving left and right. It looked like he was trying to keep an eye on Mr. Cahill, but also stay in cover at the same time.
And at that point, what did you decide to do?
Well, I couldn't tell if Trooper Webb was still shooting or not, but I was still hearing gunshots. So just based off of, unfortunately, seeing other law enforcement officers being ran up on and shot, I knew I had to do something in that moment.
What do you mean when you say having seen other folks run up on and shot?
I've seen it in the news before, where guys have just run up on cops at traffic stops, state troopers, where guys have run up on the cops and overpowered them and took their life. And that was my fear.
What was your main concern at that point, or who was your main concern at that point?
Trooper Webb.
And because you were concerned, what did you do?
I went into my closet and I grabbed my wife's handgun, and I chambered around and I fired 2 shots.
And was it out of this window that you fired those shots?
Yes, I fired 2 shots, yep.
And that's the closet that you got your wife's weapon out of, is that right?
Yes.
And is that the case that it was in?
Yes, it is.
And is that the weapon?
Yes, it is.
So that pink handgun,
Yes.
you pointed it out of that window in your bedroom,
Yes.
and you fired 2 shots.
Yes.
What was your goal when you fired those 2 shots?
My intent was to hit Mr. Cahill. If anything, if I didn't hit him, to distract him long enough, because you could hear the sirens from the other law enforcement vehicles coming, so I knew backup was on its way. But my goal was to distract him long enough so that backup could get here and Trooper Webb could stay safe.
You could see from where you were watching, there was no backup there at this point.
Not at that point, no.
How much of your military training played a part in what your response was that day?
I'd say probably 80% of it, because I don't think anything can prepare you for anything like that in your home, or outside of your home. But yeah, I would say the decision and it was based on my training, I guess you could say that.
So you fired 2 shots out of your bedroom window, and then what happened?
Mr. Cahill turned around and started shooting back at me.
What did you do?
I took cover and then slowly made my way back into the living room so that I could make sure that Trooper Webb was okay.
So you fire those two shots out of your bedroom window. You're trying to triangulate the whole thing, aren't you?
Yeah.
Make sure that the defendant knows that there's a threat coming from something other than Trooper Webb.
Yeah.
And you were successful with that, right?
Yes.
You go back into the living room and you're checking on the trooper.
Yes.
What's going through your mind at that point?
Can't believe this is happening. It was a crazy, just overwhelming sense of, I don't know, anxiety. Yeah.
Once you were in the living room looking out that window, did you hear something that sounded like footsteps?
Well, I did. I made my way back to the master bedroom after I could see that Trooper Webb was still moving, and at that point I could see that Mr. Cahill had left, and at that time I heard him going up the stairs and had a moment where I questioned whether or not I had locked my front door or not, and so I ran to the front door, made sure it was locked, and then I just sat there until everybody else showed up.
So you run to your front door, make sure it's locked, and did you sit there right in front of the front door?
Yes.
Did you call your wife again?
Well, not immediately. I called 911 and then told the dispatcher just to let people know that I was still in that building, and then I called my wife back, and she yelled at me.
What did she say?
I mean, understandably, so I put the phone down when all of this was happening, so I'm sure she probably heard a lot of what was going on. But
Did you put the phone down? Did you hang it up, or did you just put it down?
No, I just put it down.
Okay, so she was listening to everything happen?
For a minute or two, I think, yeah. Yeah.
And so you call her, she's mad at you, then what happens?
Once she realizes I'm okay, we're fine. She's going to get the kids from the schools. The schools are on lockdown, too, because of the whole event as well.
Where were your kids in school?
So at the time, my girls were at Allen Elementary, right there on Legacy and down the street from Lebanon a little ways, and then my son was at Hunt Middle School.
And you said the schools around there were on lockdown, is that right?
Yes.
Was she on her way to go get the kids?
Oh, yeah, but when I called her back, yes.
And what did you tell her?
At that point, I just told her what I had observed. I didn't share with her my interaction at that point.
Did you tell her not to come home?
I did, yeah. She ended up going to the friend's house that she had lunch. She picked up the kids and took the kids there until later when she was able to come get me.
Okay. So you hang up with your wife. You know that she's going to get the kids and go safely to her friend's house.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do at that point?
I'm just sitting and waiting.
And eventually, did you leave your apartment?
I did, yeah. I don't recall whether it was like Frisco SWAT or if it was FBI, but somebody came and knocked on the door and said, hey, at one point he's like, are you okay to stay in? Do we need to get you out? And I'm like, no, I'm cool. He's like, okay, well, things might change and you might have to get out. And I was like, okay, it's just me and my dog, so we're good. And he did come, he came back about an hour later and said, we're about to extract and we need to get you out of here. I was like, okay. So from there, ran downstairs. There's a dog park, I don't know, about 300 feet away. And so we hung out behind the dog park until later on when they released us.
And so was it dark when you got released?
Yes, yeah, it was probably about 9 or 9:30. And
talk to me about law enforcement presence there while you were at the dog park. Was there law enforcement lined up all throughout the apartment complex?
Yeah, I'd never seen so many police officers and FBI agents in my life.
And when your wife came to pick you up, did you have to walk out of the gates of your apartment?
Yeah, we had to exit through the front gate of the apartments, and then I walked up to the little shopping plaza where she picked me up.
And where'd y'all go that night?
We stayed with our friends.
Did you go back to your apartment the next day?
No, we weren't allowed to go back until I think it was like Monday morning. And even then, like they said that they didn't want us staying there. We could just go back to get personal belongings if we needed to.
So this happens on a Friday.
Yep.
You're allowed to go back in on a Monday to get your personal belongings.
Yeah.
Did you do that?
Yes. Yeah.
And where are you staying? You stay with your friend on Friday. Where'd you stay on Saturday, Sunday?
We stayed with our friends 2 nights, and then Sunday night, the church put us up in a hotel.
And so you go get your stuff on Monday. Or did you go back to that hotel then on Monday night?
Yes.
When were you allowed back to go and live in your apartment?
They told us we could go back, I believe it was Wednesday, and then, but we stayed in the hotel like another couple nights just because the kids and our whole family, we weren't really ready to go back yet.
Was everybody afraid to go back?
Yeah.
How did you feel about going back?
I just knew how my wife and my kids felt about going back. And so, of course, for their safety, I was also anxious about going back as well.
Now, you left at 9:30 that night on that Friday.
Yeah.
Did you tell law enforcement right away about your involvement and everything?
No, I didn't. My interaction with law enforcement was very limited to begin with. I had a detective call me from Frisco PD at one point, and she took down my personal information. And so I knew I was going to talk to somebody eventually, but I didn't want to take any attention off of what was already going on. I just wanted everybody to be able to do their job and not make it about me.
When you think back to that day, how does it make you feel?
It's still brings on a lot of anxiety.
that day when you made the decision to get your weapon out and shoot out of your master bedroom window, you allowed for a distraction like you intended.
Yeah.
Had you not done that, there's a good chance that our trooper would have run out of ammunition. Did you know that?
Cause for speculation.
Sustained.
Do you see yourself as a hero that you are for what you did that night?
I don't see myself as a hero. I see myself as a person who lives in a world where people stand by and don't do anything in situations like this. And I think people need to stand up and do more instead of saying what should be done. And I also took an oath. And just because I'm not active duty anymore doesn't mean that that oath went away.
Kathleen.
So, Mr. Pence, your job at the church is to produce the media, right?
Yes, sir.
You're not a minister. You help the ministers.
Yes, sir.
Modern churches all have to have media and soundboards and video.
Yes.
Even the staid Methodist church has that now. So that's an important job, right?
Yes, sir.
Which Covenant campus do you work at?
Currently I'm at the Carrollton campus.
Okay. Is there one in Plano on
there's
Legacy?
No. We have one in Crossroads. It's actually Aubrey. And then one in McKinney, just down the road here, and then one in Colleyville.
The one in McKinney, is that on 121 south of the highway?
No, it's right here off the 75.
Okay, all right. And do you work at both campuses or just the one?
I rotate wherever the projects are. That's where I go.
All right.
But on Sundays, I'm in Carrollton.
Okay. Doesn't sound like the Army's changed very much. They trained you as a tanker and put you in the infantry.
Yes, sir.
Did they at least let you drive the Stryker?
Yes.
Okay, so it didn't completely go to waste.
No, it didn't.
Although driving the tank is a lot different from driving the Stryker.
And driving the tank's a lot more fun.
I bet. All right, thank you, Mr. Pence. No further questions.
Nothing further from the state.
Is this witness released?
He's released.
Thank you, sir. You're released. You're free to stay or go, whatever you'd like to do. Call your next witness, please. Sir, please come forward to the bench to be sworn. Do you swear or affirm that your testimony will be the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Please have a seat.
My name is Colin Kimball. I am the site administrator for IC Solutions, and we manage the inmate phone system. We have over 100 phones in the jail that the inmates have access to. They are connected to our computer database system so that every activity, all the activity on the phones is recorded by our system into a relational database.
So when individuals are booked into Collin County Jail, are they given? First off, when inmates are booked into Collin County Jail, are they given an identification number as far as just this is your CCSO number, inmate?
Right. Yes, the sheriff's office assigns each inmate an ID number. It's a 6-digit number currently. That number is assigned to them for life, so sometimes when we see inmates come back that have been arrested before, they have a smaller number, but that number stays with them. That's what we use to track them. as they have to enroll on our phone system when they're booked in. They are given a 4-digit PIN. It's usually assigned to them at first, and it's usually the month and date of their birthday. They enter their SO number and that PIN. They're given the option of changing that PIN. They're then asked to enroll their voice. So we get them to state United States of America 3 different times, and we get a voice print of their voice stating United States of America, and our system associates that voice print with that PIN code. So we have a double verification to know when an inmate is using the phone. So after that process is complete, when an inmate wants to use the phone, they lift up the handset. Once that handset's been lifted on that phone, our system is now recording all the activity associated with that phone. They enter in their 6-digit ID, which tells us who they are. They also have to enter in their PIN code. PIN code's kind of like their ATM code that keeps another inmate from using their PIN or their ID. Once they enter their 6-digit ID, their SO number basically, their PIN code, then the system asks them to state United States of America. They then say United States of America, and if the voice print matches with the PIN code, they're then allowed to proceed to make a call. And it's after that step that they get to dial the number.
So when they're booked in, they're given a unique number. They then are given a PIN that eventually they can choose on their own.
Correct.
Now, that doesn't keep people from using other inmates' numbers or their PINs, correct?
Correct. There's inmates barter, trade either commissary food or phone calls. It's sort of like a currency. But the PIN number and the voice print slows that down quite a bit.
Well, and that's where I was going was we've got that number that matches with a PIN, and if you don't know the PIN, you can't use somebody else's number. Then it goes to, well, if they bartered with you and they said, well, here's my number and here's my PIN because I've got, X amount of dollars on there to be making phone calls, we have that next layer, which is the voice print, and if it's a different voice, that should kick it out.
If the voice print doesn't match the PIN code and the ID number, the call is not allowed to proceed. Sometimes an inmate might have some chest congestion, and it may ask them to repeat it 2 or 3 times. I see a lot of inmates. It's not uncommon for an inmate to come into our jail extremely inebriated, and when they do their voice print and when they sober up and get into a jail, their voice print doesn't match. I have to then help them reset that. But it's not uncommon to see an inmate try to use the phone several times and get rejected, and then finally make a call.
Then let's talk a little bit well, let me back up. You had mentioned once someone picks up that phone, the system's going to start recording.
That's correct.
Okay. And so along with the capability of the system in the jail to allow for the phone calls and the safeguards associated therewith, it also is a system that is a recording system. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And so when someone uses their inmate ID, uses their PIN, uses that voice recognition, and the call is allowed to be made, are their phone calls recorded?
They are. Every single phone call is recorded unless it's designated as privileged. Defense attorneys are the only people that are allowed to have privileged phone calls. We go through a very strict vetting process to make sure that that phone number is associated with a defense attorney. But other than that, every single call is recorded.
And those recordings, are those stored and kept for a certain amount of time?
We keep them indefinitely as long as we have the contract to provide the services. You can go back and get all of our telephone calls that have been recorded.
And the system that holds and retains those telephone calls, is that a system that that anyone can go up to and start getting into and messing with phone calls?
Our system, our database is a secure database. Only certain users have access to it. Staff in the jail, law enforcement officials, investigators in the DA's office, they have to be specifically authorized and then granted permission. And then just because they have access to our software, there's certain roles that we designate. And so, for example, a lot of the corrections officers have access to this software so that they can view scheduled video visits. We also maintain a video visitation system, but they cannot access the part where they can listen to the calls. Once the calls are recorded, they're basically frozen. They can't be altered. If a call is listened to, we track that so we can tell who's listened to the call. And if there's a notation made, sometimes they listen to a call and they hear something that might be critical to an investigation. There's a feature where you can create a note. Once you start making that note, once you hit save, you can't go back and change it. So if you misspelled a word or if you associated it with the wrong call, it's tough. It's frozen.
And so the individuals that you talk about, the people who have access to those calls, those individuals may have access at the highest level to listen to them. Nobody outside of you even has access to delete or alter.
That's correct. Once they are stored in that database, and they can't be deleted.
And you are the custodian of that database, is that correct?
That is correct for this facility, yes, sir.
And the calls therein?
Correct.
May I approach, Judge?
Yes.
And do you see a marking bearing your identification to verify that you looked at the contents of State 364?
Yes, I signed my name and the date of 5/19/21.
And the contents of States 363, as custodian, are those phone calls made by the Sheriff's Office identification number 1, Bryan, Cahill?
That's correct.
And these are true and accurate copies from your system that you just described to the jury?
Yes, sir.
Now, you are not here to testify that you know Bryan Cahill's voice or his mother's, and you cannot identify the voices on these calls, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. You're just here to say these are true and accurate records from our system?
That's correct.
Okay. We'll offer States 363 for record purposes at this time.
No objection to 363 for that purpose.
States 363 is admitted for record purposes only.
Thank you, sir. That's all the questions I have.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Kimball, just a few questions. How many different telephone calls are recorded on that Exhibit 363?
I believe it's somewhere near a dozen.
And they have been made at various times over the period that Mr. Cahill has been in the Collin County Jail, is that correct?
That's correct.
And he's been in there since the 29th of March, 2019, correct?
I don't know the exact date that he arrived in jail, but I started there in 2018, and he came in sometime after. I remember when he came into jail.
So he's been in there 26 months.
Something like that.
Over that period of time, how many total telephone calls has he made?
I don't have that number in front of me, but it's quite voluminous.
Many more than the dozen that are recorded here.
That's correct.
And if you know, how were those 12 that are recorded on the exhibit, how were they selected to be recorded?
The investigators selected those, and that's all I know.
All right, the police investigators or Mr. Mitchell's investigators, or which investigators?
I was handed that by the DA's office, so I'm assuming somebody on their staff.
So they said, here are the 12 calls we want isolated and put on this CD, and since you're the custodian of records and that's your job, you did it.
That's correct.
All right, thank you, Mr. Kimball. No further questions. Thank you.
Is he released?
By the state, yes, Your Honor.
He is released.
Thank you, sir. You're free to stay or go, whatever you'd like to do. Is now a good time to break for lunch? All right, let's go ahead and take our lunch recess. Members of the jury, please be back in the jury room at 1 o'clock. We will continue at 1 o'clock. Please remember the court's instructions: don't investigate the case or discuss the case. Thank you. See you at 1 o'clock.
All right.